What I love about open source software is that it allows more people to shape the software that's shaping our world.
We really wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have community if it wasn't for our open source.
If you look around the industry, you'll see so much of what we do is powered by open source software, even if you don't know it.
Open source is at the heart of pretty much most technologies that people are using today.
It's so important because it's also a way to share ideas.
So if you want software that really serves a lot of different types of needs, that serves different types of communities, you need more people building that software, and open source allows for that.
Hello everyone, Mabuhay. My name is Serena and I'm the Developer Marketing Lead for Southeast Asia at Amazon Web Services. Congratulations PWA on your anniversary. At AWS, we are committed to fostering diversity and inclusion globally and are always looking for ways to amplify voices and empower diverse communities such as yourself. We're glad to be alongside with you, contributing back to the Philippines women in technology. Thank you for the amazing work you do and have a wonderful anniversary celebration.
What I love about open source software is that it allows more people to shape the software that's shaping our world.
We really wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have community if it wasn't for our open source.
If you look around the industry, you'll see so much of what we do is powered by open source software, even if you don't know it.
Open source is at the heart of pretty much most technologies that people are using today.
It's so important because it's also a way to share ideas.
So if you want software that really serves a lot of different types of needs, that serves different types of communities, you need more people building that software, and open source allows for that.
Welcome to Hacktoberfest. Hacktoberfest is a month-long celebration of open source software run by DigitalOcean. Hacktoberfest is open to everyone in our global community. To participate, you'll need to submit 4 quality pull requests to public GitHub repositories. When you do, you'll earn some swag, including your very own Hacktoberfest 2020 t-shirt. You can sign up anytime between October 1st and October 31st, and we encourage you to connect with other developers and Hacktoberfest enthusiasts for virtual events and information sessions starting in September. In this quick video, we'll introduce you to Git and GitHub, the version control system that we'll be using to track your progress and repository hosting service that shares projects to collaborate on. By the end of this tutorial, you'll be ready to submit your first pull request and will be well on your way to participating in Hacktoberfest. Before we begin with Git and GitHub, let's talk about version control. When developers work on a project together, oftentimes they'll need to work on the same code base. While they're working, each developer needs to know about what changes the other dev made, so as not to duplicate work or write code over what has already been done. A version control system serves as a saving program for the code, where it assigns a version to a project and tracks changes made over time to each file in the project. In this way, developers can work together on a project by checking in with the latest version to see the changes made before working on their portion of the project's code. Git, a version control system used to manage developer projects of all sizes, was created in 2005 by Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, to help developers contribute code and share code revisions in a way that was fast, efficient, and inexpensive. Git creates code repositories to help developers edit, share, and publish code for all. GitHub is a cloud-based repository hosting service that allows developers to take code that they've written on their local machines and share it with the world. GitHub provides a way to share the version track projects on your local computer publicly through repositories or central file locations. And depending on the project's availability, it can either be a private or a public repository. Other developers can continue the project to edit the code, provide insight, and more. To get started with GitHub, you can create an account at github.com. We have links on the Hacktoberfest resources page that details exactly how to get started with GitHub. Check it out after this video. All right, let's get started cloning and editing our first repo. First, let's navigate to the repo that we'd like to clone. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to use our Haiku repo. If you're following along with me, we've provided the link in the transcript for you to clone this repo as well. So I found a repo that looks interesting to work on that I can contribute meaningful content to. Remember, each of the pull requests you submit for Hacktoberfest should contribute to an existing repo in a way that helps the project to thrive. Take some time to pick one that resonates with you before starting. All right, before I clone this repo, that is, take a copy of the code here on GitHub onto my local machine, I want to take a copy of the whole repo into my own GitHub account. To do this, I'll make a fork of the repo. It's like I'm taking a bite of it, a copy that I can use to edit that doesn't affect the main or source code base. I'll navigate to click the fork button. Then watch as GitHub takes this repo and adds it as a copy to my account. As you see, now my name appears as the creator of this repo, which is a fork of the main Haiku repo. Next, I'll need to navigate over to my command line interface. I'm using Terminal on Mac, but there's a number of command line interfaces that are available for your OS. Use the one that works best for you. Git also offers a graphical interface that allows you to edit repos with visual commands. A link to download and learn more about that interface is available as a resource. In the terminal, I'm going to enter git clone. This command will clone or copy the copy that I just created from the Haiku repo down to my local machine. This will enable me to make changes to the code base locally or on my own machine to upload to the cloud remotely. Awesome. So we have the Haiku repo down on our local machine, and now we're ready to make a change. Using the command line interface, I'm going to navigate to the folder of our cloned repo, Haiku repo, by using cd or change directory. I'm using Visual Studio Code as my text editor and IDE of choice. There's a number of editors and IDEs or integrated development environments out there that allow you to write code in a number of languages and format it using best practices, snippets, and more. While Visual Studio Code is just one IDE, I'd suggest checking out a few and picking the one that works best for your coding environment. Resources on picking an IDE can be found on our Hacktoberfest resource page. Now, in a situation where I'm in an unfamiliar code base, I take my time to read and understand everything that's going on and find parts of the code that I might make more efficient or suggest different solutions for. It's worth it to fully understand the code base and read any associated documentation provided before making changes. Now that we've made a change to the Haiku repo, we'll need to track and save that change. The first step in tracking your change is to add it to the version you're working on. To do that, we'll execute the command git add. Writing the command in this way allows you to add all changes made to the repo across files. If you need to only submit changes to an individual file, use git add in the name of file. After we add, we'll get no confirmation. To see your changes, you can execute the command git status. This allows you to check on the status of your track changes. We'll see that your file has been added, but not committed as a change. Git provides this step in the event that you need to amend a change before officially tracking it as new or edited code. Next, let's commit our change. We're confident that it's right and would like to submit this change for consideration of those who maintain the project. I'll execute the command git commit and add a message with /m so that other developers who are collaborating on this project will know what my changes are. In this way, everyone can be informed of changes that are made. This message is tracked along with the commit ID in my username so other developers know who added this change. After committing, I'll need to push my changes from my local machine to the remote repository on GitHub. To do this, I'll execute the command git push. Here, we can designate an origin for the push. In this instance, we want it to go straight to the main repo that I forked from the source Haiku repo. So far, we've identified a repo that we'd like to edit. We took a copy of the repo onto our GitHub account and local machine using fork and clone. We then made a change and submitted our change with git add, then solidified our change by running git commit, which committed the change, and git push, which pushed our change from the local machine to the remote repository on GitHub. If we look on GitHub now, we'll see that the change we made is reflected in the files in our copy of the repo. Exciting! We're now ready to let the maintainers of the project know that we have a change to the repo that we're confident about and ready to submit. To do this, we'll click the pull request button here to the right. After the pull request button is clicked, a new page will open with a form that explains the changes we made and shows if the changes made will in any way conflict with the existing content. We'll add in an appropriate title that details the change, and in the description add an explanation of what changes were made and why. What you add here can vary depending on the project. Take a look at the project's collaboration guidelines to make sure your pull request is formatted correctly. After adding in that information, we'll scan the PR page to make sure that our committed change does not conflict. If everything checks out, we'll get a green Submit Pull Request button at the bottom that escalates our request to make a change to the source Haiku poem codebase that will be live for anyone viewing that main branch. Be patient. It may take maintainers some time to review your request. Amendments and comments can be added on the pull request page, and new commits to the same affected files will appear in the request history here. Congratulations, we've successfully submitted our first pull request.
What I love about open source software is that it allows more people to shape the software that's shaping our world.
We really wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have community if it wasn't for our open source.
You know, if you look around the industry, you'll see so much of what we do is powered by open source software, even if you don't know it.
Open source is at the heart of pretty much most technologies that people are using today.
It's so important because it's also a way to share ideas.
So if you want software that really serves a lot of different types of needs, that serves different types of communities, you need more people building that software, and open source allows for that. love about open source software is that it allows more people to shape the software that's shaping our world.
We really wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have community if it wasn't for our open source.
If you look around the industry, you'll see so much of what we do is powered by open source software, even if you don't know it.
Open source is at the heart of pretty much most technologies that people are using today.
It's so important because it's also a way to share ideas.
So if you want software that really serves a lot of different types of needs, that serves different types of communities, you need more people building that software, and open source allows for that. What I love about open source software is that it allows more people to shape the software that's shaping our world.
We really wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have community if it wasn't for our open source.
If you look around the industry, you'll see so much of what we do is powered by open source software, even if you don't know it.
Open source is at the heart of pretty much most technologies that people are using today.
It's so important because it's also a way to share ideas.
So if you want software that really serves a lot of different types of needs, that serves different types of communities, you need more people building that software, and open source allows for that. What I love about open source software is that it allows more people to shape the software that's shaping our world.
We really wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have community if it wasn't for our open source.
If you look around the industry, you'll see so much of what we do is powered by open source software, even if you don't know it.
Open source is at the heart of pretty much most technologies that people are using today.
It's so important because it's also a way to share ideas.
So if you want software that really serves a lot of different types of needs, that serves different types of communities, you need more people building that software, and open source allows for that. What I love about open source software is that it allows more people to shape the software that's shaping our world.
We really wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have community if it wasn't for our open source.
If you look around the industry, you'll see so much of what we do is powered by open source software, even if you don't know it.
Open source is at the heart of pretty much most technologies that people are using today.
It's so important because it's also a way to share ideas.
So if you want software that really serves a lot of different types of needs, that serves different types of communities, you need more people building that software, and open source allows for that.
Okay. Hello everyone. I'm Andresito de Guzman, the Community Lead for PWA Pilipinas. Welcome to PWA Pilipinas Hacktoberfest Celebration 2021. We are broadcasting live via PWA Pilipinas Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages. Hacktoberfest is a month-long global celebration of open source software run by DigitalOcean in partnership with Intel, Appright, and DeepSource, with a strong focus on encouraging contributions to open source projects. PWA Pilipinas Hacktoberfest is a series of events that will allow participants to learn about open source and new technologies like progressive web apps and more, with boot camps to learn the basics of the web and even an introduction to progressive web apps. One can make meaningful open source contributions. Before we begin with our celebration tonight, I'll be introducing first our organization, PWA Pilipinas. Okay, so PWA Pilipinas, we are a community for makers, designers, and users of progressive web apps here in the Philippines. Our mission, yung mission namin, pwede tayo mag-Taglish, is to introduce and nurture progressive web apps development and adoption in the Philippines and beyond by fostering a community for subject matter experts, enthusiasts, adopters, and developers of the platform, and by providing resources and engagements to stimulate interest in PWA technology, because our vision is that progressive web apps would be adopted widely here in the Philippines. Okay, before we continue, I'll be adding to... Oh, is he here already? My co-host is here. is connecting. Okay. What's next? But what's that PWA I'm talking about? Well, PWAs or progressive web apps are your web applications that are supercharged with native app-like features such as the ability to be installed, work offline, and more across all different devices and form factors. Okay, so speaking of Hacktoberfest, we do have a set of events this month. We started with NASA Space Apps Challenge last time, which happened last October 2 to 3. We also have tonight our Hacktoberfest celebration. We also have a few more in the coming weeks. We have web talks. We have a boot camp with Zuit, Code with PWA. This is a free boot camp. We will be announcing more about this boot camp later. It's happening on October 16th and 17th. We also have an event with Stack League. It is an introduction to progressive web apps. And we also have a celebration of open source on October 23. Ayan. Dito na ba si Michael? Hi Michael, how are you? Ayan.
Ayun,
Natin yung mic mo. Ayun.
Good evening, Andre, and sa ating
Ayan.
mga tagapakinig.
Sayang hindi mo suot yung Oktoberfest shirt mo.
Hala.
Okay lang yan. Marami pa tayong event. O yung speaker natin nakasuot na agad ng Oktoberfest. Oh. Ayan, no. Mamaya lagay natin siya sa screen. Pero ito muna. Ayan, no. So, dahil syempre Oktoberfest celebration, syempre kailangan may pa-prize tayo, pa-premyo tayo sa mga nanonood sa atin tonight.
Yo.
Oh,
Gusto ko yan, Andre, yung premyo.
Oo, so manood kayo from starting right now hanggang matapos siya. Tapos, we want your feedback. So, syempre, pag binigay yung feedback na yon, magkakaroon kayo ng chance to win a prize. So, ano ba yung prize na yon? Wait lang. Ayan. So, sinong gusto ng ticket sa Softcon? Yan, syempre, di ba? Mga conferences, di ba? In demand ngayon. So, mamimigay tayo ng 3 tickets sa Softcon 2021, courtesy of isa ating speaker. Binigay ito ng speaker natin si CJ Villafranca. Ayan. So, maraming salamat. So, mamimigay tayo ng 3. So, ano ba to Softcon na to? Ayan, no. So, sabi, Softcon is the biggest virtual event for software and IT professionals in the Philippines, produced and organized by the Philippine Software Industry Association, PSIA. So, 9th year na ng Softcon, no. So, parang siyang conference, so pwede ka pa makipag-network. Ayan. So, meron tayong mga local and international speakers dyan. So, andyan ako last year as an audience, syempre. Pero syempre, diba, we're giving a chance na makapanood din kayo nito kasi each ticket actually cost. Grabe, nalula ako nung tinignan ng price kanina. 7,000 pesos. So, grabe. Diba? So, ang laking nun, if ever you will win sa ating raffle. So, ito yung mechanics for this. So, sabihin na namin agad, no? para alam nyo from the start kung paano. So, yan, lakayan lang natin siya. So, first is, watch yung live stream. Tapos, mamaya, no, magbibigay kami ng mga codes. Papakita natin yung codes dyan sa screen. Tapos, naman nun, like, at the end of the program, visit nyo yung app.pwpilipinas.org. Ayan, nasa screen yung URL. Or i-download nyo yung PWA Pilipinas app sa Google Play or sa Microsoft Store. Tapos, gawa kayo ng account. And then, click nyo Events tab. Yan na, click yung Events tab. Tapos, hanapin nyo lang tong event na to. So, pag nakita yung event na to, Oktoberfest Celebration, click nyo yung Register. So, mag-open nyo ng feedback form, no? Na i-open natin mamaya. Tapos fill up nyo yung form, kasama nung nakuha yung code. Tapos kung sino yung makaka-complete nung 3, makakasama dun sa raffle. So, syempre, kung wala masyadong nag-fill up, automatic kayo agad yun. Pero kung marami, ira-raffle natin yan sa mga naka-complete nung form. Yan. So, ayun mamili tayo ng 3. So, open siya for PH residents. Tapos, i-announce natin yung winner sa October 17. Syempre, i-check pa natin yun, no? So, yung form ay i-close din natin mamayang 12 midnight. Yan. So, i-open natin siya mamaya-maya after nung last talk. Tapos, close din natin siya ng 12. So, kailangan i-fill up nyo siya agad after ng event na to. So, to qualify, so, syempre, at least, no, siguro at least 2 dun sa code na ipapakita natin. So, baka medyo ma-miss mo siya dahil nag-dinner ka saglit. So, bumalik ka. So, basta makuha ka ng 2 code, kasama ka na dun sa raffle. Ayan. So, kamusta naman yun, Michael? Excited ka ba dun? Parang gusto ko din sumali.
Sana, pwede akong sumali dyan na Andre, ha?
Oo naman, yung mga viewers natin pwede sumali dyan.
Mag-scan kayo nitong Pilipinas code na ito, ha? Tapos sumali kayo dito sa...
Wait lang, etong code na to, kung may account na kayo, pwede nyo siyang i-scan using yung app natin. So, parang mas mabilis. Pero kung hindi siya ma-open using yan, nandito yung ating mechanics. Popost din natin mamaya sa comment section yung mechanics na yan para lang maalala natin kung paano siya.
On deadline ay 12
midnight.
Ating gabi. Okay? So, focus sa inyo guys. Scan the app. Gumawa na kayo ng account sa Pilipinas. Then scan the app para makapasok na kayo sa raffle.
Pero syempre, fill upan nila yung form mamaya. Nabubuksan natin mamaya. Syempre, nood muna tayo. Okay, so ito yung app na yun, no? So, buksan nyo yung app.pwpilipinas.org kahit isang browser. Pero kung may Android kayo, so search nyo lang yung PW Pilipinas. Or kung may Microsoft Store kayo, PW Pilipinas, search nyo lang doon. Makikita nyo na siya. Yun, before tayo mag-umpisa, no? May opening remarks muna tayo saglit kay sa CEO ng DigitalOcean, si Yancey Spruill. Yeah, let's watch this. Oh no. Ayan. Sorry, live event. Technical difficulties.
Welcome to Hacktoberfest. At DigitalOcean, we believe the community is bigger than just us, which is why we celebrate the open source community throughout the month of October. We started Hacktoberfest in 2013, and that first year we had nearly 700 participants. And over the years, Hacktoberfest has grown to a community of over 150,000 participants in 135 countries who participate by sharing their projects, making pull requests, attending events, donating, and showing their support of open source. We welcome everyone of all backgrounds and levels of technical experience, especially those who are new to open source. Thank you to everyone participating in Hacktoberfest this year, especially the maintainers of open source projects. It's because of you that Hacktoberfest has been a success in bringing so many people into the open source software community over the many years. We can't wait to see what this year's contributors do. And happy hacking.
Wow. Maraming salamat sa message from the CEO of DigitalOcean, Yancey Spruill. Ayan. Huwag natin patagalin pa, no? May script ka ba dyan, Michael? Ikaw na yung mag-introduce sa ating speaker ngayong gabi. Para malagay natin siya sa stage.
Ayun, maraming salamat at excited akong makita kayo ulit sa PW Pilipinas Hacktoberfest special. Ayan, alam mo Andre, masaya ako ngayon dahil napaka-special ng ating, we have a very special guest for today. Andre,
idol ko to eh. Nagulat ako, sabi ko, hala. Ayun, so in-accept natin agad yung kanyang
kailangan marinig natin siya, no? Siyang Filipino freelance software developer, open source advocate, cybersecurity researcher. Naku, mga pag nahack kayo dyan, ha? Alam niyo kung sino contact. And technopreneur. No? At saka siya ay author ng more than 40 open source projects and Animate CSS contributor. Ayan. Siya ang CEO ng WG.co, Executive Director ng Algo Filipino, and lead developer naman ng Where Neutron Developers. Ayan.
Yeah.
So, please welcome Warren Gonzaga.
Welcome.
Hello. Good evening.
Ayan. So una muna, no, pwede mo na i-share yung screen, pero for now, no, magbasa muna tayo ng mga shoutouts kasi ang dami mong fans. So unahin natin si Joseph DC. Yan, Idol Warren. Sabi naman ni Emily Natividad, Warren Gonzaga, Heart. Ayan, may heart. Next naman si JC Pabulos, pa-shoutout Idol Warren. Ayan, shoutout.
Shoutout.
Yeah. Ito naman, si Felix Jerome de la Fuente yan. Go, Sir Warren Gonzaga.
Thank you.
Okay.
Pwede na?
Okay, pwede na tayo siguro mag-start.
Alright. So, yun. Welcome sa mga bagong devs ng open source. So, ayun. Start tayo. So, I'm here para mag-introduce or mag-guide sa inyo sa open source. Kunin ko lang aking ano. Ayan. Alright. So, introduce ko lang din ulit yung sarili ko. So, I'm Warren. So, I guess madalas na makita yung logo na yun or icon sa mga projects. So, ayan. Then, ito yung background ko. So, I'm a founder and CEO ng sarili kong company, WG, and Executive Director ng Algo Filipino currently, and then lead developer ng Where Neutron Developers. So, ito yung open source na dedicated na team ko, ng Where Neutron Developers. So, kami yung gumawa or nag-respond ng COVID-19. So, gumawa kami ng tracker na pwede mo ma-access sa terminal. So, million yung gumamit that nag-lead sa amin para makakuha ng sponsorship mula sa Vercel. And yun, sa DigitalOcean din. Okay. So, ito yung background ko pagdating sa open source. So, first of all, isa ako sa mga core contributor ng Animate CSS. So, ako yung dahilan kung bakit buhay pa rin yung old project na Animate.css. So, continuous ako nagko-contribute until now. So, mula version 3 siguro papunta na kami ng version 5 eh. So, we are currently working on for version 5 para i-support yung mga latest na front-end frameworks. And also, nag-contribute din ako sa mga popular open source project. Hindi naman siya ganun kalaki pero still counted as contribution pa rin naman. So, since yun naman yung soul ng open source contribution. And also, author ako ng 40 plus open source projects. So, meron dong work in progress. Tapos, meron din na-publish na, which is currently used by other project, website. Tapos, yun. Then, currently, na-reach ko lang yung recently 400 na followers on GitHub. So, iba't ibang mga nagpa-follow sa akin. May beginner, may mga co-contributor ko din. So, siyempre, follow lang, ganyan. At, currently sponsored ako at supported ng mga big tech companies. So, didiscuss ko rin mamaya yung topic about dyan, kung paano kayo makakuha ng sponsorship, saka paano kayo isusupport ng mga big tech companies. Currently, nag-open source ako in the reason of ginagawan ko sila ng open source version ng mga products nila. For example, ang isa sa mga pinakasikat na partner ko with company is yung buymeacoffee.js. So, ginawa nilang official API wrapper yon. So, nakakatuwa kasi third-party developer ako and then naging part ako ng team nila. So, ako yung nag-work dun sa open source side nila. So, isa yun sa mga background ko sa open source. Then, yun, I founded a team which is yung Where Neutron Developers para in the future, so marami kaming nagagawang open source, ma-maintain namin. Kung hindi man isa sa amin, so kung marami tayo, kung kasama kayo, is mapapagpatuloy natin yung contribution sa mga open source. At saka isa pa pala dyan is kapag merong projects na parang hindi na active or inactive na, kinakausap namin yung author ng project. Then we are trying to saluhin yung project niya, and then nililipat sa amin yung project, and then i-maintain namin. Pero yung author or yung credits is still dun sa creator. So still intact pa rin siya. So kung meron kayong mga project na inactive na pero gusto niyo pa rin siyang mabuhay, pwede niyong kontakin yung team ko. So we can discuss kung ano yung possible na movement para sa open source, para still mabuhay pa rin yung project. The last is yun, open source developer advocate ako for 4 years nung nagsimula ako sa Animate CSS. So, share ko may experience ko. Ano yung pinaka-first contribution ko sa open source? Natutuwa kayo. Hindi kayo makakapaniwala. Yun. So, meron akong isang kasabihan, hindi naman siya kasabihan, part siya ng Bible verse na lagi kong dala-dala pag nasa open source ako, which is, freely you receive, freely give. Yan yung Matthew 10:8 or Matthew 10 verse 8. Sinasabi dyan na na-receive mo ng libre, i-share mo ng libre. So, ginagamit natin yung open source as a free software. So, why not contribute? Diba? So, ginagamit natin siya, hindi tayo nagbabayad, ginagamit natin siya para pagkakitaan. Simpleng contribution, why not? So, that's the soul of open source. So, instead na may closed source project ka na kailangan pa mag-hire ng devs to participate, why not i-open source mo? There is maraming developer So, paano kung mag-contribute sila lahat? So, di ba? Gagalaw yung project, basically. Ito yung topic natin for this event. Ito yung structure ng talk ko. So, what is open source? Ano to mga summary or basic guide lang muna. Then, yung about Git, kasi baka interesado kayo sa Git. Yung susunod na speaker natin tuturo yung process or paano mag-Git ba, kung paano gumamit ng version control. So tuturo niya. Then ituturo ko sa inyo yung basics, yung steps, yung workflow as open source dev. Paano ba kumikilos or gumagalaw yung isang open source developer. Tapos, why open source? Bakit nga ba? Mga benefits, yung tulad ng sabi ko is yung sponsorship, indirectly, saka directly na kumita ng pera. So, it's not totally free work. So, dun yung matututunan sa part na yan. Then, saan magko-contribute? And paano magko-contribute at saka paano maging maintainer or yung ikaw yung mismong may hawak ng open source project. Paano mo may-maintain yun? So, i-share ko sa inyo experience kung paano mag-host ng isang project at mag-build ng community. So, may-enhance talaga yung skills niya pagdating sa open source at saka napakalawak talaga ng skill set kapag pumasok kayo sa world of open source. So, tips and tricks, ito yung mga common na questions sa akin, saka common na nakikita kong mali sa mga open source na mga bagong contributors. Lalo't na't kailangan natin ito dahil nga Hacktoberfest. So, para maiwasan natin din yung spam, yung hindi magandang practice pagdating sa open source, yung mga nagpo-pull request na kulang palang info, yan, ipo-point out natin yan sa tips and tricks. So, para smooth lang tayo sa Hacktoberfest natin. So, yan. Okay, simulan natin sa what is open source. So, basically, kung tatanungin niyo ako, what is open source? For me, free software siya na pwedeng i-modify, publicly available, pwede mo rin distribute, pwede mo rin ibenta. Pero syempre, naka-intact pa din yung credits at saka yung license ng open source project na yun. So, yun yung sagot ko kung what is open source. Pero based on Red Hat, which is syempre, nauna sa open source field, ito yung definition nila ng open source. So, referred to OSS or open source software. So, talagang dinisenyo siya dinisenyo siya for publicly accessible kasi nga tinitingnan yung code. Kumbaga, available yung every bit of code ng isang project. So, makakasigurado yung mga user na safe yung code. Walang palaman or kahit ano. Tapos pwedeng i-modify and also distribute. Okay. So, ito malapit. Natutunan ko while I'm searching. Since ang unang programmer is babae, babae din yung nakabuo ng salitang open source, which is si Christine Peterson. So, isa sa mga faces of open source na masasabi. So, yan. Coined the term open source in 1998. So, nakakatawa. And, okay. So, may comment question din dito is, ano yung mga requirements sa open source? Actually, kailangan mo lang ng basic technical knowledge. Hindi mo kailangan maging programmer, developer, or what. Kasi ang open source is not all about coding. It's all about contribution. It's all about care doon sa project. Kahit simpleng documentation lang o typo, it's still counted as contribution. So, may naitutulong ka pa rin. So, wala yun sa laki at saka sa liit ng contribution mo. It's still counted as contribution. May impact ka pa din. So, why open source? Ito yung sagot ko. Personally, everything is open source. Yung mobile phone mo, kung Android ka, open source yan. Yung ginagamit o binibisita mong website is gawa sa WordPress, open source din yan. Mostly, everything is open source na. Kahit yung closed source software, may halong open source yan. Kasi gumagamit yan ng MIT license ng mga software. So, legally, pwede nang gumamit sila ng mga open source. Actually, kahit mga website, kung gumagamit ka ng React is still open source. So, everything is open source. Yan. Kahit yung, kung sa field ka naman ng electronics, yung Arduino, still open source yan. So, for me, everything is open source. We are powered by open source. Ayan. Dito naman tayo sa topic ng mga benefits. Unang-unang benefits dyan, syempre, is may improve yung existing skills mo. It's not only technical skills. Kasi, kahit designer ka, kasi merong mga repo ako nakikita is tulad ng SVG, meron tinatawag na SVG for yung sa Twitter eh. Hindi. Yung emoji ng Twitter, hindi mga dev ang nandun. Mostly mga designers. So, kung designer ka, may improve din yung skills mo kasi i-convert ka ng emoji, ng graphics, then meron ding repo na about SVG, magko-convert ka ng graphics. Kung aware kayo dun sa project na simpleicons.org, mga designers andun, ko-convert nila lahat ng mga available na brand online. So, pag tingnan nyo yung repo, sobrang daming request. So, kung designer kayo or SVG designer kayo or artist, punta kayo doon, you can still contribute. Kasi actually, nangangailangan ng tulong yan kasi ang dami talagang request doon. So, ito na sabi ko, it's not all about writing codes. Pwede rin kasi kung galing ka sa management, magaling ka mag-manage ng tao, pwede kang tumulong. Check mo yung mga PR, mga pull request, yung management, then respondehan mo yung mga PR, i-manage mo yung workflow ng open source, ng community. Actually, ang daming pwedeng gawin pagdating sa open source. Hindi lang coding. Kasi ang common na tingin ng tao is pag sinabing open source, kailangan programmer ka, kailangan. No. Kasi not necessary. Kung magaling ka mag-document, you can still count it. Ayan. Another benefits naman ng open source is matutulungan mo yung software na ginagamit mo. For example, sabihin natin Vue.js, hindi naman siya magiging widely used kasi, syempre, without the support of the community. So, continuous lang yung development niya, PR dito, PR dyan, submit issue. Kahit simpleng issue, nai-improve mo yung software na ginagamit mo. Even kung may security bugs, dinadaan pa rin yon, pero hindi PR dinadaan pa rin yon sa private na message. Kasi, syempre, pag security issue, bawal talaga sa GitHub yun. Or bawal mong i-publicly disclose yun. So, kung bugs naman, ganun, PR mo lang, still counted as contribution. So, another benefit is expand your network. So, ito yung tinatanong sa akin lagi. Bakit daw ang dami yung network pagdating sa mga devs? Ito yung reason. Kasi, once na sa open source ka, marami kang mamimit na tao. So, may newbie, mayroong experience, mayroong top developers, may galing sa ibang company, may galing sa yung mga sikat na kami, Netflix, Facebook, yan. Isa dyan may mga nakilala ko sa nagtatrabaho sa Facebook, sa Netflix, sa Google, dahil sa open source kasi napapadaan ako sa mga projects nila. So, diyan kami nagkakaroon ng communication, diyan yung direct na contact. Yan. So, maliban diyan mo rin makikita yung mga future employers mo and clients. Tapos, at the same time, sa open source, kung mayroon ka nakikitang mali, turuan mo. So, at the same time, tuturuan mo. Tapos, may time nga yan is merong isang issue. Kailangan ko pa mong mag-research para replyan siya. So, at the same time, gusto ko siyang tulungan. So, napapa-research pa ako para ready yung reply ko sa kanya. At the same time, nakakatulong tayo. At may natutunan niya. So, parang mas better kasi ang knowledge sa pera. So, susunod na lang kasi yun kung marami ka ng knowledge. Ayan, dito tayo sa next topic, which is make money directly on open source. Ito yung sinasabi ko, which is pwede ka kasing mag-ask ng funding. So, kung makikita nyo, merong mga funding, saka donation or support pagdating sa open source. Ginawa talaga yan kasi para yung mga devs na talagang dedicated sa open source, pwede na silang mag-quit sa work nila and then mag full-time. Pero hindi ko recommended yun. Sa kanyo lang gawin yun kung meron kayong isang open source na sobrang valuable na hindi nyo na kaya pagsabayin yung work nyo. Kung kumbaga may handang sumuport para lang mag-open source kayo. Yun ang pinaka-good thing sa lahat. So, hindi ko siya recommended. Pero, at the same time, kung marami naman kayong open source na ginawa, pwede naman kayong mag-ask ng funding, donation. Huwag nyo ikakaya yun. Kailangan nyo ng pang-maintain. Kasi syempre, parang parang nililibre ka na ng kape. Ito yung libre ko sa'yo kasi nakatulong ka sa akin. Parang ganun. So, parang pwede mo siyang gawin yun. So, ito yung mga example ng pwede nyo gamitin na platform, which is yung Github sponsors, which is currently hindi pa available sa Pilipinas, pero paparating na. Pwede kayo gumamit ng Patreon, at ito yung pinaka-paborito ko, yung buymeacoffee.com. So, ito yung ginagamit ko pagdating sa open source. Then, coffee.com. Yan. So, pwede nyo siyang gamitin yung mga platform na yan. Pero yung github.com yung sponsors, hindi pa siya available. So, pwede pa naman kayo gumamit nung nila, feature, pero limited. So, parang hindi siya default something. Pero pwede siya i-configure. Example lang is yung mga project ko, visit niyo yung profile ko, then makikita niyo may mga sponsor na button. Then, tingnan niyo yung GitHub folder ko na meron doon funding na file. Actually, kapag pumunta tayo sa GitHub, enable nyo lang yung sponsor tapos automatically mag-generate na siya ng funding file. As fill upan nyo na lang yan kung anong kasi. Tapos then meron naman yung documentation. So read na lang. Yan. Ito yung sinasabi ko, pag gumagawa pala kayo ng open source, make something valuable. Kasi yung pera susunod lang yan. Kasi siyempre nakita nila yung value ng project mo. Handa silang magbayad or mag-donate or what. Kasi meron akong mga na-encounter na project na sobrang ang daming gumagamit nung software niya. Then yung dev nagkasakit. Nagkasakit yung dev. Ngayon, walang mag-a-update ng project. So, para makatulong sila, gumawa sila ng fundraising doon sa open source. Para tulungan yung dev, and then yung dev, nung nakabalik na yung dev, siya na yung mismong tumuloy ng project. So, yun, isa sa mga benefits ng open source. So, hindi siya, masasabi siyang libre, pero darating din yung tutulungan ka din ng mga tao, basically. Kasi, valuable yung project mo. So, indirectly naman, so make money indirectly. Ito yung makakakuha ka ng clients. Actually, marami nagme-message sa akin nung simula nung sa open source ako. May mag-PPM, gawan mo ko ganito, gawan mo ko ganyan. Yung mga freelance opportunity. Kaya na-achieve ko yung freelance na status until now na-maintain ko siya. So, diyan ka kasi madi-discover. So, may kukontak sa employer, i-hire ka, or clients, or meron kang mga freelance task, mga simple task, yung mga bilisan lang. Tapos, hindi lang yon. Meron din kasing mga nagpapa-customize. Halimbawa, ang tawag namin dun is support. Kaya hindi nila alam gamitin yung open source mo. Kailangan nila ng direct support sa'yo, ikaw mismo yung tutulong sa kanila, pero paid yun. So, indirectly, in manner, yung make money na yun. So, still, may pera pa rin sa open source. Pero, sa una, wala. Kasi, syempre, wala ka pa naman valuable na nagagawa. So, kailangan gumawa ka ng open source na talagang valuable. At saka, tulad nga sabi ko, Pero huwag kang gagawa ng open source dahil gusto mong kumita. Ako kasi, nag-open source ako kasi ito talaga yung passion ko. Kumbaga hindi ako nakakaramdam ng pagod pag nagko-code ako ng open source na alam kong maraming nag-aantay, maraming umaasa, maraming gustong gumamit. So yun yung parang nagbibigay sa'yo ng ano, ng reason bakit kailangan mo i-continue yung paggawa ng software. Yan. So, eto, where to contribute. Na-discuss natin bakit, benefits. So, where? Marami, basically. Kasi ako most likely lagi ako nasa GitHub. So, pwede kayo mag-explore sa GitHub. Gamitin nyo lang yung mga sorting functionality na feature. At since Hacktoberfest ngayon, search nyo lang yung label na Hacktoberfest. Anything na makikita nyo dun sa sort na yon is available for contribution. Lahat yon, pasok yon. Pero sa Hacktoberfest kasi, bago kayo mag-contribute, keep in mind na magre-register muna kayo, mag-sign up muna kayo gamit yung GitHub nyo or GitLab nyo bago kayo mag-contribute. Kasi baka masayang yung contribution nyo. Kasi hindi basta-basta kumakagat yun eh. Ayan, Open Source Friday, ginagamit ko din yan tuwing Friday or weekend ako nag-open source. First timers only to, recommended ko sa inyo to kung gusto nyo mag-jump in agad sa open source. Kapare siya nung first contribution.github.io. Diyan kayo kaagad pumunta. Kasi itong 24pullrequest.com, tuwing Christmas siya eh. So, kayong bahala kung gusto nyo mag-contribute as a gift or any reason or dahil holidays, kayong bahala. Code triage, best way for katulad ko na maraming open source project kasi i-remind ka talaga niya kapag mayroon ka pang existing issue na kailangan i-fix, para may deadline ka, kung parang ma-manage mo kasi din yung open source mo. At the same time, pag may kinontribute ka tapos parang may follow-up, siya yung nagbibigay ng follow-up sa'yo. Code triage. Yung up for grabs, recommended, pero hindi ko siya masyadong ginagamit. Yung contributor.ninja, pwede rin naman as a first timer. Pero since first timers kayo at gusto niyo talaga matuto hands-on, pwede kayo mag-contribute sa amin. So, unang-una doon sa founded na team ko is yung Warren Neutron. Meron kami mga existing projects na in progress at currently published na maraming gumagamit. So, yung unang-una doon is yung COVID-19 tracker namin na command line. Million yung users nun, and at the same time sponsored by Vercel. So dahil doon libre yung hosting namin sa Vercel. Share ko lang kasi nung time ng pandemic, hinost ko siya sa Vercel, sinisingil nila ako. Sabi nila, wala naman daw sila nakikita sa screen kasi ano daw yung project na yun, pero ang dami daw request. Kasi umaabot kasi ng milyon, halos di na kaya ng server ng Vercel. Parang napapansin na ako kasi inost ko siya sa libre. Then sabi ko, ginagamit siya ng maraming tao kasi tracker to. Nung panahon ng pandemic, alam nyo, kailangan nila maging updated. Yung tracker namin is very unique. May value proposition siya. Kumbaga, ang value niya is yung mga, hindi siya katulad ng mga ibang command line na tracker na supported. Kasi supported kasi namin yung Windows yung CMD, which is sabog pag sa ibang CLI. So nakita nila yung value na hybrid or saka flexible yung tracker namin. So, yun ang naging reason para i-sponsored kami ng Vercel, which is 100% sponsored. So, kahit ilang project pa ilagay namin is pwede kami mag-host doon. And at the same time, meron kami yung latest project na PSGC, Philippine Statistic, yung mga barangay na API. So, kinausap ko isang dev, yung pinaka-main dev nun para i-maintain. Ayun, naging part siya ng team, and at the same time, still maintaining pa rin yung project. And the rest, meron pa kami mga work in progress na project currently. Tapos meron kaming latest yung expand URL, hindi ko pa nasisimulan, work in progress. Pero kung kukontakin nyo yung team ko, pwede na kayo mag-dive in sa mga projects. Actually, yung mga projects namin is pasok sa Hacktoberfest. So, go na. Para, syempre, meron na kayong contribution. And second is yung Algo Filipino. Kaka-release ko lang kahapon ng first version ng site namin. Medyo unstable pa. Papunta pa na sa release candidate. Pero kailangan namin ng help. So kung designer kayo, web designer, web developer, at marunong kayong mag-React, punta lang kayo dun sa github.com, Algo Filipino. Then check yung mga issues. Tapos tingnan natin kung ano yung pwede nyo matulong. Then also, last is sa akin, Waring Gonzaga, kasi syempre madami akong open source and kailangan ko talaga ng help. Ang dami-dami ng project ko. At currently, meron akong isang project na nilabas recently lang, yung Emily.css, which is based on Toast ni Dan Eden, yung no-nonsense na CSS grid. Binigyan niya ako ng permission to revamp or improve yung project. So, exciting yon, bagong project for this year. Yun, marami pa kayong madidiscover na project ko. So, pwede niyo akong kontakin para actually pasok sa lahat sila sa Hacktoberfest. So, kung naghahanap kayo ng makakontribute pa, yan, punta kayo sa mga links na yan. So, ayan, pag-uusapan naman natin is how to contribute. Madali lang. Unang-una, ang recommended ko is lagi niyong titingnan, check niyo laging issues. Ano yung existing issues na kaya nyong gawin. Tapos, kung may suggestion kayo at gusto nyo parang kaya nyo naman gawin, mag-o-open kayo ng issue. It's not necessary na may feature kayo idadagdag, gusto nyo mag-contribute sa documentation, maglagay ng bagong logo, maglagay ng bagong badge, maglagay ng test, ng checking, additional checking, mga ganun. Marami kayong pwedeng i-contribute kasi, hindi lang talaga coding. Pwede ko kasi i-share sa inyo, ang pinakaunang contribution ko sa Animate CSS is typo. So, typo. Nagpalit lang ako ng letter, then in-accept nila. Then, hindi naman yung parang spam na typo na, kumbaga, naglagay ako ng paragraph, change ko yung parang, kasi, parang hindi kumpleto kasi yung readme nila noon, napaka-ikli ng readme nila noon. So, parang naglagay ko mga additional info, paano mag-contribute, yung mga ganon. Hindi yung basta lang. Kumbaga, may na-edit akong typo, then naglagay din ako ng parang, nag-umpisa lang ako sa typo, then nag-enjoy ko, pati ko improve yung readme. So, in-improve yung readme, hanggang nagkaroon ng mga badge, yan, sa akin yun. So, in-improve ko yun. Then, dumating yung time na, inas na ako na, kaya mo ba itong gawin, ganyan. Kinuha ko yun, then, contribute ako, then na-merge. Pinaka-first ko nun is, mayroon akong inedit na Ako mismo yung nag-implement ng animation kasi yung current na nag-suggest, di kaya niya implement. So ako gumawa ng animation, nilapag ko, then minerge. So tuwang-tuwa ako kasi first contribution ko yun sa isang popular na open source. Then until now, yun, yung mga feature na nakikita nyo sa Animate CSS, ayun, sa akin yun. So yung mga delay, yung mga, akin idea yung delay, yung mga class na tools, mga ganun, sa akin yun. So, ayun, may pala yan, may additional, meron yung parehas na project na ginawa ko, ang tawag naman is Fork Corner. So, style din siya ng Animate CSS, pero way siya ng pag-add ng parang yung fork key sa gilid ng mga site. So, pwede kong makikita nyo actually sa profile ko yan. Yan. So, check nyo yung existing issue and open an issue kung necessary. Pero, for now, kung wala namang discussion tab pala, tip lang kung walang discussion tab yung repo, mag-open kayo ng issue. Pero kung may discussion tab, kasi alam niyo yung feature ng Github discussions na parang forum style, dun kayo gumawa ng question or mag-suggest kasi i-move din nila yun kasi pangit tingnan dun sa issue. I-close din nila yon. Ako nagsasabi sa inyo. Ayan. So, sunod, ito pinaka-importante. Para hindi tayo sayang yung oras, always read the contributing guidelines. If any. Para hindi sayang yung oras ni maintainer at ikaw. Kasi may time na di ako nagbabasa basta lang ako nag-PR, tapos nagdiretso ako, tapos biglang kinapi-paste sa mukha ko yung mismong steps. Ayun. So, isa sa mga natutunan ko. So, lagi mong babasahin yung contributing guidelines para hindi sayang oras mo, hindi rin sayang contribution mo, hindi rin sayang oras ng maintainer. Yan. Pag okay ka na dyan sa contributing guidelines, ipo-fork mo ng repository. So, dito na papasok si version control, which is yung Git. Kung nag-worry kayo, ano yung Git? Ituloy nyo yung panonood dito sa Hacktoberfest kasi yung susunod speaker natin si Ben, tuturo niya yung Git flow, I guess, during Git, yung paano gumamit ng version control. Next, pagka-fork mo, syempre meron ka ng copy nung mismong project. Kikreate ka ngayon ng branch for your contribution. Madalas gamit namin is feature, / kung ano pangalan ng feature. Parang ganun yun. Ang tawag namin is Git flow. Di ko alam kung matatakal ata ni Ben, pero I guess matatakal niya yun, Git Flow. Napaka-importante ng Git Flow sa pagdating sa open source. Kasi yun eh, version control collaboration. Then, after nyan, work on your changes. Make sure lahat ng changes nyo, gawin nyo sa isang workspace nyo. Then, i-test nyo lahat ng kailangan nyong i-test. Make sure na finalize yon bago kayo mag-submit ng pull request. Ito yung lagi namin sinasabi, mag-PR ka, ganyan, submit ka ng PR. Yun yung tinutukoy namin, pull request. Kasi, i-ask mo yung maintainer na i-pull mo tong changes ko sa repo mo. Ganon. So, hindi ka lang basta magpo-pull request. Kailangan mo i-document yon. Kailangan mo i-prove bakit namin kailangan i-pull request yan. Bakit necessary? Bakit kailangan? So, i-document mo yon. Nilalagay mo doon yung before and after nung pull request mo, yung changes mo. As in, document mo talaga. Pero hindi naman sobrang haba. Summary lang. Then, i-mention mo yung necessary issues na pino-point out mo doon sa PR mo. For example, sa amin, sa Animate CSS, meron kaming pinapafix na bug. Ipo-point out mo yun. Mention mo yung issue. Yan. Para once na ma-merge yun, automatically magko-close din yung issue na yun at the same time. So, tipid sa oras. Yan. Pero ito malapit. Pwede kasing ma-reject. Pwede rin i-accept yung pull request mo. Ang dami kong rejection dito sa open source. So, kung nakikita nyo, sobrang dami kong reject. So, ang workflow ko, kung na-reject yung isa ko, why not create 5 PR? Diba? So, na-reject ako sa isa, gawa nga ako ng 5. Pero, makes sense na dapat yung yung PR mo, validated, at saka hindi siya spam. So, kung hindi man sa isang project na yan, sa ibang project. Parang gano'n. So, ayan, pag na-reject pala yung PR nyo, huwag kayong mababathurt. Parte yan ng open source. So, kapag sinabi nilang, hindi namin to tatanggapin, huwag mong ipe-personal yon. Kasi, yung open source kasi, napaka-importante niya. Hindi sila pwedeng basta-bastang tumanggap ng PR. So, intindihin din niyo yung side ng maintainer. Lalo't pat kung sikat yon to ng Animate, di basta-basta kami nag-a-accept ng PR. As in, talaga kailangan mo ng proof, dodaan pa yon, araw yon bago namin i-merge or i-accept. Kaya, huwag kayo mababathurt. Meron akong dito note lang. Don't let your emotion overpower your intellectual. Kasi may nakikipag-away minsan dun sa dun sa mismong PR. Bakit ganyan, blah, 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 blah. Yan. Nag-aaway sila dun, tapos, yan, wala na. So, nonsense pag ganon. Kasi, public yun eh. So, nakikita yun ng iba't ibang tao. So, payag ka ba nun? Bad impression agad yun kung may potential sana employee. Kaso gano'n ka makipag-communicate. Pagdating kasi sa open source, it's not all about technical skills. Pati communication skills mo, saka paano ka makipag-socialize sa tao. Kasi public yun eh. Isipin nyo yung GitHub or your GitLab is Facebook pero for developers. So, open yun. So, kailangan maayos kayo makipag-usap kahit sa reply lang sa PR. Kailangan maayos. As in, maganda yung communication nyo. Yan. Tapos, ito yung madalas na laging tinatanong din sa akin is paano maging maintainer. Actually, basic kasi everyone is maintainer na eh. Ayon nga dun sa tutorial ni yung complete kit about open source. Everyone is maintainer. Bakit? Kasi yung ginagawa mo as contributor is the same as the maintainer. Ang kinaibahan lang is ikaw yung may authority. Ikaw yung may-ari, ikaw yung nagpapatakbo ng workflow, ikaw yung nagpapatakbo ng community. So, medyo kailangan mas mahigpit ka as a maintainer. Kailangan marunong kang magsabi ng no. Kasi kung lahat yan i-accept mo, yung open source project mo, magiging Frankenstein. Alam mo yung ibig sabihin? Magiging Frankenstein, mawawala ng direction yung open source mo. Yeah? So, kailangan marunong kang magsabi ng no, tapos keep the conversation friendly. So, kung may i-reject ka na PR, kailangan wag naman yung parang payabang na kailangan sabihin mo, sorry kasi hindi siya pwede dahil yung direction namin is di ganito, ganyan. So, kailangan maayos ka pa rin makipag-usap. Tapos, yun nga yung sabi ko lagi is don't let your emotion overpower your intelligence. So, wag kang mabathurt. Madalas mangyari sa akin yung promise sa open source, maraming mga nagre-reject. Kasi nga, minsan, lumalagpas ako doon sa vision nila. So, yan. Kailangan nyo pa rin intindihin nyo na lang yung maintainer. Kung maintainer kayo, kailangan maayos. Ito yung mga tips ko. Kung magre-reject kayo ng PR, pero syempre, basahin nyo naman mabuti. Make it reasonable naman to reject. Thank them sa contribution nila. Explain bakit hindi pwede. Tapos, lagyan nyo ng relevant documentation bakit hindi. Ayan. Pero always say thanks pag may contribution. Tips and tricks. Ito yung mga ito yung masyadong hot topic ng dati nung sa open source ako. Paano mag-license ng open source? Basically, ang pinaka-idea namin dito is kapag ang project mo is library or framework, gagamit ka ng MIT license or similar para pwede siyang gamitin sa ibang closed source project nang walang issue. Kapag ang project mo naman is application or software tools or anything na ginagamit as third party tulad ng WordPress, which is web app, basically CMS, GPL. Kasi pwede mo siyang distribute, modify, pero hindi mo siya pwede isama sa closed source kasi hindi nga pwede. Isipin mo, CMS, yung WordPress, pasok mo isa pang CMS. Bawal yun. So, malalabag mo yung GPL license niya. So, naisip mo rin, merong plugin. Plugin is considered as GPL. Kasi pinapasok mo siya sa isa pang project. So, which is kaya GPL din yung license ng WordPress. Basta tandaan nyo, library and framework, always MIT license or similar. Hindi necessary na MIT lagi. Recently, nagpalit ang Animate CSS ng license. Ang tinatawag namin is HL or Hypocrite license kasi based on MIT license din yon, pero nakafocus naman siya sa privacy, sa security, sa humanity. So, meron na tayong license for privacy basically. HL ang tawag. Hindi pa siya na-implement pero latest siya. Ayun naman, kasi ang worry kasi ng mga dev ngayon, ginagamit yung open source para mag-violate ng privacy, which is ayaw nyo yun. So, yung iba nagpapalit ng license, which is yung HL. Hot topic pa siya, so hindi ko pa siya masyado na-deep dive. So, inaaral ko pa kung lilipat ba ako doon or i-stick ako sa MIT license sa mga yun. So, kung may question kaya additional sa licensing, punta lang kayo sa choosealicense.com. Ito yung ginagamit ni GitHub. Tapos, note ko sa mga feature contributor is yung proper Git message. Kasi may nakikita ko fixed, mga ganun, fixed bug. Mali yun, committed, parang ganun. Make it as imperative mode. Kung yan, wag contribute, wag created contributing guidance. Gawin yung create diretso as in para kayo nag-order. Kung fixed yan, gawin mo fix as commit message. Pwede mong gamitin naman yan kapag nasa change log ka na. Kasi change log past na yun eh. Pero kapag sa commit message, para lang maging consistent at saka best practices, gagamit kayo ng imperative mode. Tapos, proper versioning, kasi may mga nakikita din ng mga nagko-contribute or mga maintainer na hindi masyadong aware sa semantic versioning. Kunyari, may nakita kasi ako version 1 kahapon. Bukas, V2 na. Pero yung changes niya pang patch. Ay, sabi ko, nako, mali yan. Ito, sundan mo tong semantic versioning. Simula nung pinakita ko sa kanya, naging okay na yung versioning niya. Kasi nakakalito talaga yun, promise. Sobrang nakakalito. Kaya gawin natin standard si semantic versioning. Example niyan is kung makikita nyo is 3 number kung napapansin nyo. Ibig sabihin ng una na number is yung major version. Meaning, sobrang laki ng changes na kayong makasira or merong breaking changes. Minor naman na version niya sa gitna. Kung meron kayong bagong feature, mga ganyan. May na-add kayong bago, may possible din na may breaking changes din dyan, pero hindi ganun kalaki. Yung patch, yun yung madalas na makita nyo nagbabago sa dulo. Ayan. So, lang yan. Yan yung madalas magpalit eh. Version 1.0.1, 0.2, ganyan. Tapos yung huling-huli, pwede kayong gumamit ng kung anong stage na nung project. Kapag sobrang early version yan, tinatawag namin alpha. Tapos nilalagyan namin ng -alpha 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, or 0.4, 0.5, 0.6. Bahala kayo kung gaano kadami yung changes nyo. Tapos, pag beta, yan, kung nasa close or open beta na kayo, then RC for release candidate, meaning malapit na siyang maging publicly available sa production ready. So, kung meron pa kayong question or gusto niyo mag-read about proper versioning, pupunta lang kayo ng sember.org. So, nandun lahat ng information, best practices para sa versioning, para maging ready kayo as a maintainer in the future. Kasi talagang kailangan kayo talaga gagawa ng release lagi. Ayan. And, ayun. I guess, yung mga natutunan nyo is ma-apply nyo sa real world open source. So, kung gusto niyo ng mentorship sa open source, sasali kayo sa community ko, which is andito sa screen. So, yung Discord. Andun lahat. Then, mayroon pa ako isang community na specifically for open source. Pero, wag sumali na kayo dyan, nandun na rin lahat yon. So, dun ko kayo matuturuan closely about paano mag-contribute, paano yung best practices, ano yung mga pwede nyo ma-contribute. Kasi marami talaga kaming project inside. So, ako din, kulang din time ko, kaya kailangan ng help sa mga feature devs, sa mga gusto mag-contribute sa open source. So, yan, ready ako sa question.
Okay, so first and foremost, thank you, Warren. Ang dami naming na-pick up on that talk. No? Like yung licensing, di ba minsan parang medyo tabu yun. Parang, like ako minsan pag ini-minimize mo na lang, ganun. Or MIT, ganyan. So marami tayo.
Gumawa kami ng idea dun kasi last time, tanong din lagi sa amin dyan kailan mo gagamitin yung license? So ayan, yun yung pinaka-basic na namin idea. Kapag application, GPL. Pag library, framework, MIT. Tapos, ganun siya.
Okay. So, if may questions kayo for Warren, i-comment nyo lang yan dyan sa atin. Ay, may mga shoutouts tayo from Jaro daw. Yan. Mature na daw yung boses mo. Yan.
Uy. Salamat.
Ayan. Sabi naman ni Kim, hello daw. Ayan. Hello.
Hello din. Hello, Kim.
Sabi naman ni JC, yan si JC. Great. Malaman, sir. Ayan. Sabi din nila, Marie Dominic, go, sir. Ayan.
Ayun, mga taga-Azure Pilipinas.
Sabi ni Reka, ayan, hello po. Sabi naman ni Christian Mina, ayan, si Christian Mina, go, sir, Warren Saga. Ayan. Ayan. Tsaka sabi ni Danny, woo! Ayan. Okay. Watching a board, sabi ni Melissa. Ayan. Okay. So, may tanong ka ba, Michael, kay Warren?
Alam mo, Warren, napakaganda ng talk mo. Dami ko rin natutunan about open source. Yung dedication in supporting the open source community. Yan, sabi ni Maridom, nice talk, sir.
Salamat.
Okay, guys, pag may mga tanong kayo, magtanong kayo dito sa comment section. Facebook.
Habang available pa.
Speaker natin mamaya, si Seiji. Yeah. Good evening, PWA.
Ayun.
Kita-kits mamaya. Oo. Given na nag-maintain ka ng mga large projects, paano mo, syempre di ba, hindi may iwasan na may parang politics sa GitHub, di ba? Parang, paano mo ini-ensure na yung set of principles mo nasusunod pa din? Kahit na minsan pa, di ba, like, kunyari, may sumaling experts. Parang talagang pinipili niya yung di ba, principles nila. Paano mo mini-maintain na ito yung gusto ko talaga for the project?
Ang idea dyan is, kailangan bago ka mag-create ng open source, meron ka ng parang vision dun sa project. Kasi, di ka lang basta-basta mag-create ng open source ng walang reason or kumopya ka lang or gusto mong makigaya. Kailangan, pag gagawa ka, make it something na hindi pa nagagawa. Parang invention. Kung hindi pa siya existing, why not create one, diba? Ikaw na mismo magsisimula nun. Tapos, yung sa idea naman na gano'n, mayroon sa kasi may na-encounter ako niyan mag-create siya ng issue, bakit dito, ganito, ganyan. Ginagawa namin siya ng technical na analysis muna, kung bakit ba talaga pwede yan. So, magbabatuan kami ng link, ng mga references, kung ano yung masusunod. Pag valid naman yung yung argument niya, i-accept namin. Then, mag-a-assign na kami ng specific na date saka time kung kailan siya gagawin, i-work on project. Kung kaya naman kumuha ng issue, why not, di ba, submit PR. Minsan kasi mayroong magsasuggest, sabi namin, okay, kung okay yan, go for it, kahit PR. Tapos yung iba naman, di naman kayang gumawa ng PR, di ba? So, maghahanap pa kami ng ibang gagawa nun. So, yun. Ganun siya, ano yan.
Okay. Sabi ni JC, yan, milestone. Sabi naman ni Roland, very informative, Sir Warren. Salamat po. Add ko ito sa mga aaralin ko about Git.
Meron pa yan. Dagdag mo dyan yung Git flow. Meron pa kaming best practices about Git branching. Meron yung tinatawag na, yun yung tulad na sabi ko ngayon, feature, / kung anong feature, kung fix, kung release. Meron yun. I guess, madadaan siguro ni Sir Ben. Yes.
Okay. So, guys, habang yung mga questions niya habang andito pa si Warren, no? Siguro, no, any tips lalo na sa mga kasi 'di ba, typically nakakarinig sa Git mga 'di ba, mga working na. Paano pag mga students na gustong mag-start sa open source? Kasi minsan, 'di ba, parang sobrang overwhelming ng Git. Ang dami mong kailangan install, may mga keys pa. So, ano yung parang tips mo siguro for students na
Actually, ang Git ngayon is di na katulad ng dati na nagsimula ako. Kasi natuto ako sa terminal nung nag-Git ako. Pero ngayon, meron ng GUI. So, di na kayo ma-overwhelm kasi pwede kayo magsimula sa GUI. Pero, recommended ko, kahit gumagamit kayo ng GUI, gumamit pa rin kayo ng terminal kasi may case talaga na terminal or CLI lang ang makakasolve. Hindi siya nakikita ng GUI. So, recommended ko yon. So, at the same time, aral kayo ng ganun. Merong tinatawag na open source.guide na website. Punta kayo doon. Nandun yung actually hosted ata siya ni GitHub. So, nandun yung mga tutorial kung paano yung paggamit ng Git. Sabi dito, may nag-question.
Questions. Sir, kung babalik ka as a beginner, anong dapat mo muna i-search na pwede i-contribute? Ano yung flow mo para maghanap ba?
Ayun. I-share ko sa inyo kung paano ko na-discover si Animate. So, bakit siya napili ko para maging lifetime na doon ako mag-maintain? Kasi nung nagsisimula ako as developer, hindi ako marunong mag-CSS eh. Hindi ako marunong mag-styling, mag-animate. So, nakita ko si Animate CSS, sobrang dali gamitin. Then, over time, ginagamit ko siya. Sabi ko, parang mamamatay na siya kasi hindi na siya masyadong nag-update. Why not mag-contribute ako? Doon ako nagsimula mag-aral ng CSS. So, nagkaroon ako ng reason para matuto. Then, nung nag-contribute na ako doon, hanggang ngayon, na-maintain ko na yung CSS. So, kung maghahanap man ako ng open source, simulan mo sa ginagamit mo as a dev. So, kung gumagamit ka na React, di ba?
Tsaka ganda kasi pag pipili ka ng issue, pwede yung alam mo or pwede yung gusto mong matutunan, di ba?
Yung as in, yung pwede ka nakagat at the same time, available ka. Di lang naman coding documentation din. So, my question, how do you
deal with in-demand clients of yours?
Napaka-tricky question. Kasi ang reply ko madalas dyan, kaya din ba ng budget? Diba? Kasi minsan, mataas yung demand nila, pero syempre yung budget, hindi, alam mo expectation versus reality. So, ayan, pag binigyan niya ng budget, ito yung pwede kong i-provide. Ito yung, kung gusto mo to lang ito makatipid, ito yung mga alternatives namin. So, at the same time, kung makikipag-deal ka sa client, make sure na meron kang alternatives, meron kang recommendation, yun. Para at the same time, makatipid din sila. Diba? Kung talagang gusto mong makatulong, it depends naman sa iyo.
Okay, so mukhang wala nang questions, no? Siguro to ask, given na you're in freelance and open source work, and it's a special day ngayon about mental health, no? So,
yes.
How do you keep yourself na parang paano mo na-separate yung personal life mo sa, 'di ba? Work with open source, yung time, paano minamanage yung time?
Yan, good question. Basically, meron kasing mga batang alam mo yun, code everywhere. May ini-install pa sa phone na mga code editor, nagko-code sa jeep or nagbabiyahe ko commute. Ayun. Nanggaling ako doon. So, ganyan din sa sobrang addict sa coding doon. Sinabihan ako ng mentor ko na mayroon kang code editor sa cellphone mo. Why? Sabi ko, wala, di ako sa code So, mali daw yun kasi mag-burnout ka kagad, which is tama naman. Ang bilis ko mag-burnout ng mga time na yon. So, ang pangit nga talaga. So, to separate, ang ginagawa ko is, pag gantong araw, open source. So, pag gantong araw, work, open source, work, ganyan. Tapos, gumagamit ako ng Trello. Dati Trello kasi gamit ko for time management. Pag araw to ng open source, araw lang ng open source. So, naka-separate siya. Tapos, syempre, para hindi ka ma-burnout din. Pag hindi mo trip mag-open source. Kasi time yun eh, kailangan mong, pag nasa open source ka, kailangan alagaan mo sarili mo. Kasi paano kapag nawala ka, yung open source mo, pumamatay ka sabay mo. Di ba? So, kailangan, meron kang, meron kang, alagaan mo pa rin sarili mo para yung open source magtagal din. At saka, syempre, since, open source, kailangan meron kang tinatawag na co-maintainer eh. Yun pala yung sa tip. Kailangan meron kang tinatawag na co-maintainer in case unavailable kayo, siya yung taga-maintain ng project kung wala kayo. Kasi siya may access sa buong project. Pero at the same time, share pa rin naman yung credits. So, ayun, kinig music.
Of co-maintainer, no? Ano yung characteristics na hinahanap sa isang co-maintainer? Kailangan ba kasundo mo?
Not necessary na kasundo. Siguro same kayo ng vision. Sa paniniwala dun sa project na yun. Kasi kung yung maintainer mo is naka-focus lang talaga to help you, hindi eh. Kailangan pares kayo ng ng paniniwala dun sa project eh. Bakit kailangan yung dalawang buhayin yun? So, ano yung benefits nila na makukuha? Ano yung feel na nakakatulong sa maraming tao? Yung project namin na Animate CSS, actually, yung time nga nun is talagang mawawala na yan eh. Pumasok si Elton, which is yung pinaka-co-maintainer, then pumasok ako. So most likely, kami dalawa yung nag-aano ng mga chores. So ako yung gagawa ng feature, siya yung mag-check, siya yung mag-merge. So ganun yun. Kailangan nyo ng parang specific type of job description kapag nasa open source. So parang napapractice ka na kagad sa corporate world eh. Kasi parang ganun yung workflow nun eh. Diba? Meron kang senior, then ikaw yung So, yun, maaga kong naranasan. So, yung pagdating ko ng corporate, ay, ganito pala yun. Parang parehas lang. So, may advantage siya may advantage naman talaga pagdating sa open source. Madali ka makano.
Okay.
Kaya pang isang question.
From Maridin, pag malaki yung budget, sir, hindi po ba nakaka-pressure?
Nako. Actually, nakaka-pressure kasi syempre, wala kayong budget. Then, nasa sayo naman kung kaya mong gawin. Yun lang yun. Kung kaya mong gawin, why not? Kung i-deserve mo yung price na binibigay or yung budget, why not? Ayun, why not?
Okay. So, ito siguro last question na lang. Parang like, top 5 GitHub bots na you find really, really helpful.
First of all, siyempre, si Dependable. Default na yan eh. Talagang kahit di mo siya i-install, maano pa rin sa repo mo eh. Alam mo yun, nag-alert pa rin. Eh, syempre, gawa ng GitHub. Meron pa akong ginagamit for checking. Circle CI, syempre, sponsor natin. Tapos, Vercel. Bot din na Vercel. Kasi yun yung nag-automate ng production namin. Sobrang dali gamitin nun kasi pagka-push mo, automatically, nag-create na siya ng production. Saka nagde-deploy na agad. So, wala na yung mga configuration. Diretso na siya eh. Tapos, si Stackhawk. Siya, pang security din siya. Para siyang Dependabot, pero DAST kasi type siya. So, applicable siya sa mga API, which is most of my project kasi based on API din. Then, framework library. Tapos, the last is di ko alam kung pwede ba to. Yung GitHub workflows. Customize. Kung customize ka lang, mahilig ako mag-customize minsan doon yung parang yun. Pwede na naman yun kung gusto mong hindi mo trip yung mga existing na bot. Pwede kang gumawa GitHub workflows. Hindi lang naman siya about dun sa pagde-develop eh. Pwede mo kasi automate dun. Kaya may nagsabit ng issue, di ba? May nagsabit ng issue. Pwede siya mag-fetch ng data, ano yung result, paano siya magko-compile. Ayun. Actually, sobrang lawak ng GitHub workflows. Ayun. Thank you.
Okay. So, may comment si Marino. Yan. Thank you, sir. Great talk. Yan.
Ayun. Naka-t-shirt din pala to DigitalOcean, no? Hacktoberfest. Kasi nag-join ako last time. Last time.
Okay. Any last words? Siguro, any last tip, advice, or kung saan kanila pwede mahanap?
Ayun. Yung link ko is pwede nyo puntahan is waringgonzaga.com. Yun lang, nandun na kagad ako. Ay, actually, yun na yung yung GitHub profile ko yun. Tapos, last tip, kung maintainer kayo or nasa open source project kayo, laging iisipin na parang anak niyo yung open source. Ganun kayo mag-care. Kasi papalakihin niyo yun, i-grow niyo yun, papakainin niyo. So, ganun yung way dapat ng thinking niyo sa open source. Kasi once sa tinulungan mo yung open source, babalik sa'yo yan eh. Babalik at babalik sa'yo yan. Tutulong sa'yo yan. Kahit anong case, babalik at babalik sa'yo yan. Actually, yung PHP, di ba? Alam yung PHP, open source din yan. So, dyan ako madalas kumita. O, syempre, open source, pinagkakaitahan mo. Syempre, diba? Nagigets niyo yung point. So, open source is talagang nakakatulong. Actually, dyan din, because of open source, dyan ako nagkaroon ng work. And then, at the same time, naging freelance dev. Kaya, binabalik ko yung benefits from open source. So, kahit di nila nakikita, nagko-contribute ako.
Okay. So, maraming salamat, Warren, for giving us the time. Sobrang, sobrang maraming natuwa na, audience natin tonight. So, before bago tayo mag-end, magpipicture muna tayo. Like, lagi namin ginagawa sa PW Pilipinas to. So, gagawin natin, ipo-point natin sa gitna. Ayan. Fix naman yung positions natin. So, hanapin mo lang kung saan yung center. Ayan. Yung ginagawa natin.
Ito.
Yan.
Ayan, ganyan.
Yan, ganyan. Okay. So, mag-smile na tayo. Ayan. 3, 2, 1. Smile. Happy Hacktoberfest.
Hacktoberfest.
Salamat. Okay na.
Let's bolt in.
Ayun, maraming salamat, Warren.
Maraming salamat, ha. Wow.
Thank you.
Kita-kits ulit next time.
Next year.
Next year, pwede. Di ba?
Pwede.
Oo. Ang dami kasing topic sa open source, eh. No?
Sobra.
Okay, so balik lang tayo sa ating screen. Yan. Ayan, dapat pala pinesend ko na to. Pero, ang code natin, sinabi natin kanina, yung code natin ay, with you. Ayan. So, kung alam niyo yung para sa yan, sabihin namin after nito. So, ang unang code natin, tandaan niyo yan, with space you. With you. Yan. So, para saan nga ba yung code na yan kung hindi niyo napanood kanina? Okay. Saan na siya? Ayan. So, we want your feedback. Pero, with feedback, meron din tayong paraffle. Yan, courtesy of Seiji Villafranca. Yan, kung nanonood siya, maraming salamat. Kasi namigay siya ng 3 tickets for Softcon 2021. Yan. Softcon 2021 is the biggest virtual event for software and IT professionals in the Philippines, produced and organized by the Philippine Software Industry Association. Softcon is now in its 9th year. 9th year na pala ng Softcon. Yan. So, may conference siya with international and local speakers. So, if gusto niyo manalo ng tickets para dyan, yan, tandaan niyo yung code na with you, tsaka yung mga sasabihin namin code mamaya. Pero ito yung mechanics kung paano manalo, So, first, manood kayo ng live stream. Like, nanood kayo ngayon. Tapos, sasabihin namin yung mga codes throughout the event. So, tatlong code yan. Tapos, pag nakuha yung code, na nakabisa yung sulat nyo, visit nyo lang yung app.pwpilipinas.org. Ayan, nasa screen. O kaya naman, i-download yung PW Pilipinas app sa Google Play or sa Microsoft Store. Yan. Tapos, gawa kayo ng account. Tapos, check nyo yung events tab. Tapos, hanapin nyo yung event na to. Yan. Tapos, click nyo yung register button. Fill up yung form. Yan. So, ilagay nyo yung tatlong code na yun, or at least 2. Yan. Pero magandang 3. Ayan. So, pipili kami ng 3 winners na nag-fill up ng form to win a ticket. So, open siya for Philippine residents only. Tapos, yung winners will be announced on PW Pilipinas SOCMED sa pages namin on October 17th. Tapos, yung form will be open after the talk, after ng event, and will close ng 12 midnight. Ayan. 12 midnight. Yan. So, to qualify, at least 2. Yan. So, kung na-miss nyo itong sabi namin kaninang code, may 2 pa. Yan. Kaya, nood lang kayo. Huwag kayong umalis. And, sabay-sabay tayo mag-celebrate na Hacktoberfest. Ayan.
Yeah.
Okay. So, nasa screen pa pala yung code. Ayan giveaway na yan So meron pa tayong dalawa mamaya. So sulitin nyo na kasi per ticket actually cost 7,000 each. Grabe, mahal. So ayan, kaya make sure to write down yung code, tapos download yung app mamaya, at fill up yung feedback form and all of that para makasali kayo sa raffle. Kung sumali sa raffle, kung ilan lang kayo, di kayo lahat mananalo, di ba? So, ayan Michael, kamusta naman yung kanina? Dami ka ba natutunan?
Marami akong natutunan regarding officers. Pero ito yung Andre, meron pa tayong isa pa. No? Na magtuturo naman ng open source para sa atin. Ano? Isa siyang free and open staff advocate based sa Pilipinas, kung saan pinaghahalo-halo niya ang openness, data, technology, and geospatial fields. No? Siya ay isang alumnus ng School of Data Fellowship and Data Expert Programs, at siya ang lead ng data training sa Open Knowledge Foundation. So over the years, nagbibigay siya ng training, support, and consulting services about data literacy and free and open source software for geospatial applications. Sinusuportahan din niya yung open data and open mapping community sa Pilipinas as an individual or through yung tinatawag na BNHR, an open and FOSS 4G social enterprise that he established through Smart City. Isa siyang citizen-centric and open by default tech and non-profit na kino-found niya. So ngayon, kumukuha siya ng Geomatics Engineering na master's degree from the University of the Philippines, kung saan na nire-research niya yung use ng spatial analytics in Philippine basketball. Gusto niya ang paggawa at saka paggawa ng mga mechanical keyboard tuwing weekend. Ayan. So, para ituro sa atin, to introduce to us about free and open source software or FOSS and Git, please welcome Ben Hur Pinto.
Yan. Hello po. Welcome sa PWA Pilipinas.
Maraming salamat sa pag-imbita. I'll share my screen lang, okay lang?
Yes. Okay. So before mag-start si Sir Ben, if you have questions, pwede siya i-leave sa comment section and he will answer all of them after the talk.
Yes.
Ayan.
Kung kaya. Awesome talk by Warren, by the way. Probably I'll build on yung mga sinabi ni Warren din. Because medyo similar yung namin. Similar din yung content or yung gusto namin pag-usapan. I might deal a bit more on the philosophical kung bakit open source, bakit free software. And also, of course, sa dulo, I'll share a bit about Git. Kung ano yung experiences natin with Git. And tama yung sinabi ni Warren actually kanina. If you were probably a Git user, GitHub man yan, GitLab, or kung naabutan mo pa yung subversion, SVN, ang hirap nung time na yun. Medyo, kumbaga, hindi as beginner-friendly. But now, sobrang, ever since na nabili sila ng Microsoft, naging mas user-friendly yung in terms of using Git. So mamaya papakita ko yung mga changes na yun and what has happened over the years siguro. But of course, we'll also talk about yung very basic terminologies and also commands ng Git na dapat alam nyo as a developer or as someone who wants to contribute to open source software. So for me, mag-usap lang tayo, kwentuhan lang about freedom, openness, and things that go beyond that, not just in software but also beyond nung life natin siguro as developers or computer scientists and things like that. So yun, una sa lahat, sino ba ako? Mangganda nung presentation niya, introduction sa akin. Yes, my name is Ben. I'm a geospatial generalist. I'm an open staff advocate, and I consider myself a maptivist, data activist. I try to use data and maps to help others. Kumbaga, kung sino yung mas kailangan ng tulong, sila yung dapat mas marunong gumamit ng data, mas marunong gumamit ng mapa, mas nakakaintindi. So yeah, I'm the proprietor for BNHR. It's open data and FOSS4G, or free and open source software for geospatial applications consulting business that I established a few years back. I also serve as the data training lead for the Open Knowledge Foundation and the Chief Technology Officer for Smart City. So karamihan ng time ko for the past siguro decade, good part of the decade has been working in this field of openness, data, tech, tsaka geospatial. So medyo malalim na rin yung natin, yung experience dyan, and it's always good to see, younger people. Hindi naman matanda, pero siguro the next generation who will take the challenge of working in this field. Kasi napakagandang opportunity, napakaganda rin na experiences dito. So yeah, I mentioned I am CTO for Smart City. We're the first, I think, tech nonprofit focusing on smart cities sa Pilipinas. Our focus is really to create a co-developed, citizen-centric, open by default solutions to smart city problems. Kasi napansin namin karamihan ng smart city initiatives natin sa Pilipinas are all about tech. And sometimes it's not tech that will solve the problem. It's people, and it's openness, it's data. So that's what I do. I'm the CTO for Smart City. I lead the development and the design of our mostly open solutions. I'm also the data training lead for OKF, or the Open Knowledge Foundation. We're an international not-for-profit organization who wants to build a fair, free, and open future. So ang focus talaga namin ay openness. We teach people about data literacy, how to work with open data. We build software applications that leverage open data. So if you know SICAN, SICAN is actually built by open knowledge developers. Yung SICAN is an open source data portal. And then we also organize a lot of communities built around open source and open data. So if you heard about Open Data Day, yung celebration of Open Data Day every year, it's we help and we sponsor, and isa yon sa mga yearly events namin sa Open Knowledge Foundation. And of course, lastly, I am the proprietor for BNHR. I established it back in 2019. Ang sabi ko, it's not just an enterprise, it's also an advocacy. I wanted to have a platform kung saan pwede kong i-share yung advokasya tungkol sa open source software, open data, data literacy sa ibang tao. So most of the time, yung mga nakukuha ko dito, the things that I earn here, I actually give back to the open source software na tumutulong din sa akin. So I'm a sustaining member of the QGIS project, probably the first and only in the Philippines. Every year, part ng nakukuha ko or part ng na-earn ko from giving trainings, from certifying people on their use of QGIS, I give back sa community para ma-fund din sila for future endeavors. And yun din, as a certifying organization, my courses are vetted by the International QGIS Project Steering Committee, and part of the fee that I get there when I do trainings, binabalik ko sa QGIS community. So tulad din, building on what Warren said, you don't have to purely be a developer para lang makatulong sa open source. Although sometimes I do help sa mga ganung bagay. Mostly you can also help by looking at reporting bugs, yung mga ganito, financially supporting if you can, helping with trainings and things like that. So yun, ipop ko na rin ng konti since I mentioned that I support a lot of the open source and open data events in the Philippines. We'll be having our third Pista ng Mapa, Festival of Maps, where we celebrate open data, open software, free maps community this November 13. So if you want to learn more about that, go to Pista ng Mapa at github.io/2021. Yun. So what does open mean? Ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng pagiging bukas? Yun yung lagi kong sinasabi, pagiging bukas. Open means anyone can freely access, use, modify, and share for any purpose, right? Malaya kang makuha, gamitin, baguhin, at ipamahagi sa iba sa kahit anong purpose ang isang bagay na bukas o ang isang bagay na open. Ito yung open definition. Ang tanong naman lagi is, ibig sabihin ba nun free yung bagay na yun? Does open mean free? And the answer there is yes. Pero ang free na yun ay hindi lang yung free na libre na sa Filipino sa Filipino language. Ito ay free as in malaya. It's free as in freedom. Malaya yung bagay na yun. Ang bagay na bukas ay bagay na malaya. It's not just free stuff. And when we talk about freedom, you have to go back to the 4 essential freedoms of free software as provided by the Free Software Foundation. You have your freedom to use, freedom to study, freedom to modify, and freedom to share, basically. Malaya kang gamitin, malaya kang pag-aralan, malaya kang baguhin, malaya kang ipamahagi sa iba. Ang bagay na yon. And when it comes to software, that means access to the source code, being able to build your own binaries, being able to build your own software, being able to edit the source code, add modifications to the software, and also share those modifications to others. So yun yung ibig sabihin ng pagiging bukas sa atin. When people, this one thing na for the longest time I've wanted to na mabago sa karamihang gumagamit ng open source and free software. When you talk about free software, it's not just about cost, right? It's about freedom. Mas malaking bahagi yon, mas malaking bagay yon ng free software movement kesa yung pagiging cost. Kasi yung ayaw mo, when you talk about free software, and you also when talk about open source, ang ayaw mo ay yung malimitahan ka sa kung ano yung kaya mong gawin sa bagay na yon. Ayaw mo that you're bound in chains. Basically, you're a prisoner of the software kasi hindi mo siya kayang pasunurin. And kung kailangan mo man siyang ayusin, kailangan mong siyang ibigay sa iba at wala kang karapatang ayusin yung bagay na yon. Wala siya sa slides na to, but the analogy that I always use is the free and open adobo. Yun yung lagi kong ginagamit. Imagine kung yung adobo, hindi mo pwedeng palitan yung lasa. Hindi mo pwedeng dagdagan ng paminta. Hindi mo pwedeng baguhin yung ratio ng toyo sa suka. Hindi mo pwedeng gawing suka lang. Hindi mo pwedeng tanggalin lahat at gawing asin lang yung adobo mo. Imagine kung wala kang kalayaang gawin yun sa adobo. Hindi masaya yung buhay nating Pinoy kung pare-pareho yung lasa ng adobo para sa atin. So that's the free and open adobo. Ganun natin iniisip, ganun natin isipin yung konsepto ng malayang software, ng free software. Yan. And the first thing then that I would like us to learn, or I would like us to be knowledgeable about, is open washing. Right? Beware of open washing. Kung narinig nyo na yung term na greenwashing or whitewashing, which is basically yung mga entities pinapamukha nilang mas greenwashing, for example, pinapamukha nilang mas environmental friendly yung product nila for marketing purposes, even though it's not. Nangyayari din yon sa software, at nangyayari din yon sa data, nangyayari din yon sa openness field. Ang tawag natin doon ay open washing. This is when people, entities, spin a product or a company as open, although it is not. Right? It's having an appearance of open source or open licensing for marketing purposes while continuing proprietary practices. Medyo talamak din to. Open source has grown so much over the past few years that it's become a great selling point. Kumbaga, pag sinabing open source yung isang bagay, very fashionable na siya ngayon, very, very marketable. Unlike years ago, if you were there, mga early 2000s, alam nyo yung feeling as an open source user, especially as a Linux user siguro, coming from proprietary softwares, proprietary operating systems. Pero yung hanapin sa internet, andun pa rin yan. Yung mga pangyayari before na siguro yung iba hindi pa rin nakakalimutan. But yeah, open washing is a thing and we have to be aware of that. Hindi lahat na nagsasabing open source sila ay open source. Hindi lahat nagsasabing open data sila ay open data. When you talk about software, if they claim that it's open, check if the software is licensed under an open source initiative approved license, or at least it allows you yung necessary freedoms for it to be considered open source, right? If it's not, they're open washing. If they say that their content is open, check to see if it follows the open definition. Is it licensed under Creative Commons? Is it placed under the public domain? Kung hindi, they're open washing. Ginagamit lang nila yung term na open para mas marketable sila. Yan. So now that we know about open washing, I'd like to share a bit about what is openness ba for me as someone who's worked in this field for quite a bit of time. Ano ba yung pagiging bukas? One is liberty. It's about freedom talaga. Openness is liberty. Ang isa sa mga pinakamagandang parang shorthand na narinig ko kung ano ibig sabihin ng open source, it means permission in advance. Something is open source if you have permission in advance to do whatever it is that you need with that software, right? You don't have to ask permission from me or from anyone else who probably wrote the software to use it, to modify it, to share it with others. You are given permission in advance. Anytime that you would need to ask permission to do something to the software for your personal use, mag-isip-isip ka na, baka hindi open source yan. Now, this is different from, tulad nung sinabi ni Warren kanina, when you send pull requests. Yun kasi that's, susunod, magtitingnan natin na openness is a community. Yun kasi, yung main open source project na yun, it's a community project, right? It's not for your own personal benefit. But, if, for example, dinownload mo yung open source project na yun, nag-modify ka sa sarili mo para magamit mo siya, hindi mo kailangang humingi ng permission sa developers, sa maintainers na maglagay ng modifications for your own personal use. You have that permission in advance. But openness is also community. Again, we're building on yung naunang presentation sa akin. Ang ganda rin ng pagkakasabi ni Warren kanina about yung setup ng isang open source community. Openness is community. A few years ago, 2 years ago, nagka-problema ako sa isang open source software na ginagamit ko, which is Grass.js. So I upgraded it to the latest version, and then unfortunately biglang hindi gumana yung GUI, right? So I tried to test kung ano yung problems, hindi ko talaga mahanap. Pinost ko yung issue sa issue tracker. And within an hour, yung chair of the project steering committee, siya yung nagbigay sa akin ng cause and also ng solution kung paano ko i-solve yung problema ko. It just so happened na may hindi na backport na fix na ando na sa pinaka latest na version, pero dun sa stable version, basically sa dev version fix na siya, pero dun sa stable version na ginagamit ko, hindi na backport yung fix. So I had a choice. And this is what I like about open source. You always have a choice. I could wait for the fix to be backported, respecting syempre yung timelines ng mga developers na they release tulad ng sinabi kanina ni Warren, one parang patch version every month to fix yung mga issues. Or since it's open source, I could open up my any text editor that I have, edit the source code, and then fix the thing myself, which I later did. So it's one of the things na sobrang ganda rin sa open source. If you like fixing stuff, if you like tinkering with stuff, sobrang matutuwa kayo sa open source because you have all the freedom to do that with open source software. Unfortunately, meron ding downside yung idea that open source is a community. So this is from comic strip. I love this panel always. Parang lahat ng modern infrastructure natin probably sinusuportahan lang siya ng isang tao na passionate lang talaga dun sa bagay na yon. At pag yun nga, sabi ni kanina, pag yung tao na yan nawala, patay yung entire digital infrastructure natin. At hindi to joke. This is actually very true. If you look for the news, kung narinig niyo yung news back then, 2015, the world's email encryption software relies on one guy. Si Werner Koch. Siya lang yung nagme-maintain. And na-realize ng mga tao how fragile yung entire, digital infrastructure natin is. And I think after this, sinuportahan siya, and I think mas lumaki na yung team niya now, and meron siyang financial support from big corporations. But this was news way back in 2015 na, alam mo yun, everything revolves around this guy's work. Pero hindi siya nabibigyan ng enough support, hindi siya nabibigyan ng ganito ganyan. So may mga downsides din talaga sometimes as an open source developer and as an open source maintainer. And if you want to learn more about it, I suggest Googling The Secret Life of Open Source Developers. It's a talk by some Phos4G open source developers, Ian Turton yung isa. And yung next few slides na papakita ko galing dun sa presentation nila na yan. So parang how people think open source apps are maintained, diba? And then meron kang team, you have people working on several projects. In reality, probably it's just one guy. Right? Just one guy with a passion for fixing stuff, maintaining stuff. Pero mahirap kasi yun because developer and maintainer burnout is real. Totoo yun. Mapapagod ka rin. And yun yung kailangan nating iwasan. Right? Unfortunately, kadalasan ganito yung nagiging issue natin. Yeah, who wants well-maintained open source code? Who wants to contribute fixes? Who wants to be a maintainer? Minsan mahirap talaga maghanap. So, if you have a passion for building things, if you have a passion for tinkering with stuff, and you have a passion for fixing stuff, malay nyo, matuwa kayo sa open source. And I suggest going to GitHub, finding a project that you like something that you're probably using right now, and then try to contribute and just in any small way that you can help with the maintenance of the project, or kung paano siya, i-make sure na continuous pa rin siya. Yun. Sabi nga nila, there is no day in community. Hindi mo rin pwedeng sabihin, di ba? As a good open source user, not as a developer, as a user of open source software, hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na bakit hindi nyo muna to tinest bago nyo release. There's no day in community. If you're a member of the community, it's also part of your job to test it. Remember, most of them are doing it voluntarily to maintain software that's probably mission critical for you. Ang sabi nga, open source is a democracy. If you want something tested or fixed, then do it yourself. If it's a hardware problem or an OS problem at walang ganun yung main developer or maintainers, then ikaw yung mag-contribute nun. You do the test and you contribute it to others. Kung hindi mo kaya, or if you would like someone else to do it or explain to you how to do it, be polite. Wag tayong maging masyadong galit. Pag hindi gumana yung software, magre-report tayo ng bug tapos galit na galit tayo. Wag tayong ganun. Be polite. Remember, these are developers working in voluntarily on the project. And kahit ngayon yung mga software na licensed by GPL and most open source licenses, may clause doon na nakasulat. Legally speaking, may clause doon na walang liability yung software creator kung hindi siya gumana. Everything is liability ng user. Very clear ang GPL on that. So let's try to be polite when we report bugs or pag hindi gumana yung open source software na ginagamit natin. Let's be polite. Mababait naman yung mga tao sa community. 90%, 99% of the time. Wag tayong maging attack mode pag hindi lang gumana yung software according to what we wanted. And openness is also about a lot about collaboration. And dito pumapasok yung power ng isang platform tulad ng GitHub, GitLab, or other version control systems. It allows you to collaborate with people all across the world. One of my non-dev contributions, and it's non-dev to QGIS, was actually helping just make a better landing page sa GitHub nung project. and you don't actually need dev knowledge doon. Basic Markdown, CSS, you're fine. Hindi naman namin kailangang mag-JavaScript dyan. So Markdown and CSS, happy na kami. We were able to update yung in-overhaul yung landing page ng QGIS sa GitHub. So it's about collaboration. It's also a lot about opportunity. And this is something that I would like to open din sa mga, especially if you're students. Ang daming opportunities sa open source community, daming opportunities sa open source projects for you not just to learn, but for you also to sabi nga ni Warren kanina, for you to earn even while you are students. Pero isa sa mga things na magandang pasukin if you have time, especially if you're students, is GSOC, Google Summer of Code. It's one of those projects yearly wherein students, like siguro if you're students watching this, and if you want to have real hands-on, nitty-gritty, dirty, down in the dirt experience with open source and developing with open source, contributing to open source, isa yung GSOC sa best opportunities for you guys to learn. Yeah. I'm thinking hopefully marami sa ating students na nanonood. But yeah, if as a student, bakit ba mahalaga yung open source software para sa atin? Una sa lahat, lower cost without sacrificing quality or performance. I could probably attest to this. I haven't touched Windows, Mac OS probably for a decade now. And most of the stuff I work with, be it personal work or my consulting work, a lot of them are open source. Right? Naka-Linux yung daily driver ko na laptop for processing. I use LibreOffice mostly if I need desktop Office Suite. Right? I use free and open source software for geospatial in my consulting work. So basta may option na open source and or free software, that's what I use before actually looking at, okay, kung wala talaga, meron bang binary yung software na yon for Linux na binigay. Because almost everything has an alternative now. Almost everything, there's an open source something para sa lahat. Even Discord, right? May open source version, may open source na alternative to Discord, may open source na alternative to Zoom, may open source na alternative to almost anything. And you really won't sacrifice performance or quality. I would know. Almost 10 years na akong majority non-proprietary. Wala namang issues. As a student then, you don't need to break the law or do something illegal, just to have access to software. Pretty sure we've all been there. Lahat naman tayo ata ginawa na to sa buhay natin. At hindi ko lang sasabihin kung ano yun. Pero alam niyo yun. But when it comes to free software, there's no risk of that, right? You're free to share it. You're free to download it. You're free to install it. You don't need to crack it. You don't need to download it from shady sites. You don't need to torrent it, right? No need to break the law or do something illegal just to have access to software, right? That's one of the things na maganda with open source. Also, you have the freedom to tinker and learn how something works, right? As I mentioned kanina, if you love, kung mahilig kang magbuting-ting, you'll love open source, right? A lot of the things that you'll probably work with na projects na matutuwa ka are open source projects. And also, yung sabi sa akin ng prof ko dati when I was in undergrad, the best way for you to understand something is to see if you can translate it to code. Right? You have a mathematical formula, you have a physics law, you have things na gusto mong malaman how they actually work. Translate it to code. Pag gawa na yung code mo at yung lumalabas na output ay yung expected output, then you know how it works. And yun, with open source, you have the freedom to do that. Also, you learn skills and knowledge na translatable across different software, not just which buttons to push, right? When you do open source, most of the time, matututo ka more about yung what makes it run rather than which button to push to make it run. Another big plus is you have the freedom to use and utilize software beyond academic work. And this is something na I think a lot of us should appreciate more. My stand on educational licenses is that it's really less about altruism and teaching you software. It's more about keeping you part of the market share. Right? If you're using their software, then that means you're not using the alternative. Right? It's all about market share naman at the end of the day. When you go down to brass tacks, yun naman yun eh. If you're part of their market share, kahit libre mong gamitin yan, wala silang issue. But most of the time, these educational licenses are for academic work. What if gusto mong mag-earn using software? You technically and legally can't use educationally licensed software for academic work na gagamitin for commercial work, right? But when you use open source, that's not an issue. And lastly, and I think this is something na you would all appreciate, you can build your portfolio and get actual experience building stuff with open source, right? Kasi parang weird naman na proprietary software tapos aalaw ka nilang mag-build even though you're not technically part of the company, right? But with open source, everything is there. If you want to help, you want to get experience to actually building stuff, you have the freedom to do so. It's one of the best ways really to do this, even while you're a student. I've heard and I've read several articles saying na, top tech companies really don't look at your CV. They look at your coding experience. They look at your GitHub profile. Bakit? Kasi yun yung translatable na skill eh. Yun yung translatable na skill to actual development work. Your grades could probably say something about how well you retain stuff, right? But when you're working on actual projects, nothing beats yung experience. Yung makita mo paano mag-code yung tao na to, paano siya magsulat, maayos ba siya magsulat ng code. I mean, nagfa-follow ba siya ng community standards, nagfa-follow ba siya ng language standards when it comes to paano magpangalan ng objects, ng methods. Magigi ba siyang fit sa coding style namin as a company pag kinuha namin siya. And you can't see that just from grades, right? But you can see that from your actual GitHub profile. Pwede kong tingnan ano ba yung mga naging contributions mo sa projects and paano ka ba nag-communicate with yung developers, right? So open source allows you to build your portfolio very early, and it's something na let's take advantage of. I know a lot of developers and programmers na Pinoy na gagaling, and alam ko hindi lang sila, marami pa dyan. And just opening up this opportunity, especially ngayon, di ba, Hacktoberfest, opening this opportunity for people to learn about open source and contribute, and maybe matuwa kayo or someone matuwa sa inyo, and open that opportunity for you guys. That's an amazing thing. Yeah. This is just a list of things na if you're not sure yet kung bakit na kaya siyang gawin ng open source software, I'm telling you, kaya siya. Yung sinabi ko kanina, everything has an alternative. Ito yun. Right? Sabi kanina, open source is everywhere. It is. Right? Mozilla Firefox is open source. The Android is built on the Linux kernel. VLC is open source. The platform running Wikipedia, I think it's MediaWiki, is open source. Of course, WordPress. Right? WordPress is open source. And probably some of us have kung naging WordPress developer ka din at one point in time, you've earned from open source, right? And ang daming sabi ko kanina, right? Everything has an alternative. So operating systems, you take your pick of your favorite distro. I run Pop OS, hindi na ako nag-distro hop ever since nag-Pop OS ako. Ganun ako natuwa sa kanya. So for those who want to jump to Linux, Pop OS is a good starting point. Ang pinaka nagustuhan ko sa kanya is no nonsense built-in support for NVIDIA drivers. Hindi ko na kailangang mamroblema. Alam niya na andun yung graphics card ko at kaya niyang i-set up. Pag sa iba kasi medyo hindi ganun kaganda. So yung Pop, next to it that's Ubuntu, next to it that's Debian, next to it that's Linux Mint. For those na hardcore people, there's Arch. Yung nasa baba ang pangalawa na pula. If alam nyo yan, cool kayo. That's Red Star OS. That's the operating system of North Korea. And of course, Hannah Montana Linux. Who can forget that? Databases, right? You have Postgres. As a database manager, you have DBeaver. Office Suite. Sabi ko kanina, I use LibreOffice a lot. Collabora is LibreOffice Online. Parang Google Suite. And you have stuff like AbiWord na standalone applications for your word process or spreadsheet, stuff like that. When you code, di ba? If you run Jupyter, Atom. The third one is VS Codium. It's a fork of VS Code without the telemetry from Microsoft. So I also use mostly ngayon nasa VS Codium now. Of course, learning management systems. If you're into image processing, you don't need Photoshop. There's GIMP, there's Inkscape, there's Krita. If you're from my field, GIS and remote sensing, we have a lot then. QGIS and GRASS are just some of the few. If you're doing CAD and 3D, Blender is an amazing 3D software. FreeCAD is a very good 2D and 3D CAD alternative. And then if you're building mga PCBs, for example, you can try KiCad. And yung pinaka-importante as a student is gaming. Of course, madaya yung Steam. Technically, hindi naman siya purely but there's Steam OS. Pero yeah, Steam runs on Linux. I play Dota and watch TI on my machine. And then there's Lutris. Lutris, yung katabi niya, it allows you to play a lot of kahit Windows only games natively on Linux. So wala talaga mawawala sa iyo din. So ganun kaganda and ganun nakatindi yung options nyo with open source kumbaga, right? So yun, lahat yun intro lang talaga to talk about Git, right? Isang medyo mabilis na talk about Git. Yeah. Pero una, let's talk about version control. So version control basically is tracking, managing changes to software code. Imagine nung mga unang panahon, pag gumagawa ka ng software, kung para sa iyo lang, then kaya mo yung i-control sarili mo. But imagine as computers became more powerful, the need for tracking yung changes sa software and the need for different people to work together on software became greater. So dun pumasok yung version control. But version control isn't just for developers. In fact, I use GitLab and GitHub a lot for non-dev work. Kasi sobrang useful niya. Hindi lang siya ngayon for tracking code. Yung mga providers tulad ng GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, ang dami na nilang services na binibigay. Yung ilan doon na mention na kanina ni Warren. Hindi na lang siya for developers talaga. Okay, let's go back to Git. It was developed by Linus Torvalds. If you know him, the creator of Linux, para sa development ng Linux kernel. At that time daw, wala siyang makitang version control system na matutuwa siya as the main developer for Linux. So, in the spirit of open source, he decided to build one himself. And yeah, that is Yung story ng Git din, that's quintessential open source. Merong options, pero feeling mo hindi siya pasok sa kailangan mo. So you decide to, gawa na lang kaya ako ng bago. Or gawa ako ng something na baka mas maganda or mas useful for me. And lo and behold, 15 years later, everyone's still using Git. Similar to how 30 years later, everyone's still using Linux. Right? So, Git, hindi pa GitHub or GitLab. Yung Git lang mismo, it's a software for tracking changes in any set of files. It just so happens na yung source code natin, usually they're just basically text files, right? So, sobrang ganda niyang gamitin for tracking these directories of text files, or in our word, source code. Is it different from GitHub or GitLab? Ang sagot dyan is GitHub and GitLab, they're technically service providers built on top of Git. Right? Pag nawala yung Git, wala hub na lang tsaka lab yung GitHub tsaka GitLab. Yung main functionality nila is to manage yung Git repositories mo. So, yung repository itself, you can read yung technical nun, pero may sarili siyang structure. At si GitHub tsaka si GitLab, they are, kumbaga, optimized to read that structure, to store that structure, and to work with the metadata of Git repositories. So what can we do with Git or GitHub and GitLab in this case? You can track almost anything with it. Sabi ko nga kanina, di ba? Text files, Word documents, spreadsheets, media files, anything. One of the things na pwede nyong gawin is you can just store and track small files. It doesn't have to be source code. In some of my repos, I just store GeoJSON files or JSON files na gusto kong andon para madali siyang makuha later on and para ma-share ko siya sa ibang tao. Plus para magka-version control din ako kung mag-update ako nung flat file na yun. So plus if it's out there, it will technically pwede siyang i-serve ni GitHub as a raw JSON or GeoJSON. So useful din siya sa akin if I just want to test kung gumagana yung yung code ko sa pagkuha ng remote JSONs and GeoJSONs, for example. So sometimes nagso-store lang talaga ako ng files sa kanya for posterity's sake, and sometimes for sharing those files with other people. You can host simple web apps and static websites sa GitHub tsaka GitLab. Sobrang powerful na ng GitHub pages tsaka ng GitLab pages. So almost feeling ko lahat ng static website kaya niya na i-host ngayon. Back yung sa akin, hindi ko na piniltan, naka-Jekyll pa rin ako. Kasi doon ako nagsimula. So hindi na ako nag-transfer to something like Hugo or Jekyll pa rin, yung default ng GitHub pages. But if you're trying to build a portfolio site or just want to create a website na landing page and some stuff, use GitHub pages. Hindi naman, kung wala ka namang kailangang asikasuhin na sobra sa backend, right? Static lang talaga siya. Mag-GitHub pages ka na lang. And plus there are ways para i-proxy mo na nagmumukha siyang dynamic even though static talaga yung site. Yeah. So creating simple web apps, hosting them, static websites, kayang-kaya mo na yun sa GitHub. Of course, collaborate with others. Ito yung isa sa mga pinakabagong ng GitHub. It allows you to edit your source code directly on your browser. Right? Dati technically pwede naman, pero ang pangit ng experience. Diba? Pwede kang edit file, and then i-edit mo yung file, pero hindi siya IDE experience, hindi siya development environment experience. Now, if you press dot or period on any GitHub repository, mag-open siya ng technically VS Code on the browser. And pwede mo ka mag-edit doon. Pwede ka na rin doon mag-send ng pull request. Pwede ka na rin doon yung mga ginagawa mo sa terminal dati or sa GUI ng Git. Pwede mo na siyang, yung iba doon pwede mo nang gawin yun. So sobrang useful niya na, sobrang powerful niya na sa ganun in that sense. Yung isa pa, meron ding bago, what they call flat data. It allows you to manage, GitHub allows you to manage a data pipeline. Basically, pwede kang magsabi sa Git na utilizes GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions are automations na kayang gawin na GitHub pag may nangyari, like nag-push ka ng code, magra-run siya. In the case of this, ginamit siya para automatic mag-pull ng data from somewhere, perform something on the data, and then display it as a visualization. So you can look for samples dun sa flat data ng GitHub, and it's fairly amazing kung ano na yung kayang gawin ngayon. Hindi ko pa nasama dito, but another thing is Copilot, if you've heard of it. So medyo hot topic yung Copilot because technically yung corpus or yung pinag-learnan ng AI na yun na dataset ay mag-GitHub repo, and most of them of course are open source code. Some of them, or probably most of them, is also GPL, GNU public license. For those who are unfamiliar, it's a strictly copyleft license. Ibig sabihin, if you use GPL code, yung software na binild mo or that uses GPL code should also be GPL. Yun. So it's a very strict copyleft license. And yung hot topic is kung yung sinulat ba ng Copilot is 1:1 with GPL code, dapat ba yung ginawa ng developer with the help of Copilot GPL din? So medyo marami pang tanong tungkol dyan sa Copilot, but it's fun. It's fun, but maraming ethical gray area questions na kailangan sagutin. Most naman with AI and ML work, ganun eh. So, yun yung mga examples of stuff with medyo advanced stuff with GitHub na pwede natin magawa. So, balikan natin ng konti mga basic terminologies natin. And maya if papakita ko sa sample sa GitHub site mismo kung ano tong mga to. So, a repository is basically yung directory, yung folder holding yung source code, yung mga things na tinatrack mo. So that's the repository. A branch is technically a copy of a repository at a certain point in time, right? So pwede kang magkaroon ng multiple branches at any given time. Ang dapat kasing ginagawa natin is, for example, you have a main repository, used to be called master, pinalitan na ngayon. You have a main repository. And when you want to do updates to your main repository or yung repository mo na naka-expose sa mga tao na ginagamit talaga nila, what you do is you make a branch and you do the development there para hindi mo nagagalaw yung main repository mo. So, you have your main repository. At one point in time, gagawa ka ng isang branch sa ilalim niya. Sa taas kung gusto mo. Anywhere. Gagawa ka ng branch at doon ka gagawa ng developments mo. And pwede kang simultaneously gumawa ng developments at multiple branches. And later on, at the end of it, pag happy na kayong lahat, na test nyo na, that's when you do your merge. Right? Of course, sometimes hindi ka makapag-automatically merge kasi during the time na nagde-develop ka, nag-introduce ng inconsistency yung main tsaka yung branch mo. Right? So, kailangan mo munang i-make sure na yung inconsistencies na yun ay fixed before you actually do your merge. A clone is basically you getting someone else's repository and putting it on your GitHub account. Right? well, fork pala yun. Ang clone is putting it on your local machine. So, repository on GitHub, ilalagay mo sa local machine mo. You clone it. You fork it, yung repository ng tao, lalagay mo sa another account to your account. Commit is you pushing changes to whatever tracked files there are. Issues to yung mga issues na gusto mong i-post, there's a tab on GitHub for those issues, right? A push is you technically pushing your commits to the tracked file or all the track files na pinalitan mo na nag-commit ka. And yung PR or yung pull request is basically you telling someone na may access dun sa repository, could you please pull my changes to your repo? If you own the repo kasi, pwede mo siyang i-push directly. So basically, ito yung nasa GitHub, ito yung nasa local mo. Or ito yung nasa GitHub, ito yung somewhere else na ikaw yung gumagawa. Pwede mo siyang i-push directly kasi ikaw yung owner ng both. But if you're not a developer dun sa main, for example, and ano ka lang, contributor, hindi mo siya mapupush directly. Dapat. So, you send a pull request para pwede rin i-review ng main developers, i-review kung maayos ba yung ginawa mo. Basically, you're telling them, pa-pull naman, pahugot naman, papunta dyan sa main repo nitong mga ginawa ko kung okay siya sa inyo. Right? So just some example Git commands na matutuwa yung mga cat people. This is from at Girly Mac. So ganito yung idea ng push, right? So kung meron kang ito yung main repo mo. Right? Ito yung nasa local, ito yung nasa remote. Pag pinush mo ito, si Tabi, papunta dito sa remote, magiging tabi na rin itong si remote. Right? Na dati, ito lang siya. So ito yung mga commands mo dyan. You can, git push, remote branch, push mo sa upstream, /f pag confident ka, basically ifo-force mo yung push kahit na hindi siya kaya ng na direct merging. So sabi mo bahala na, push mo yan. So kung confident ka, /f, pero not advisable. Not advisable yung /f. Yung pull naman, kabaliktaran, from the remote, right? Gusto mong kunin sa local mo yung value ng nasa remote. So yun yung pull. So ina-update niya yung connection, yung current value ng local mo, for example, with yung pinol mo from the remote. Merge, i-incorporate mo yung changes from one branch to another, right? So kung meron kang branch na tabi, meron kang branch na main, pag merge mo siya, yung changes ni tabi malalagay doon kay main, for example. Pwede ka rin mag-rebase ng commits. Itong na to, para lang kung gusto mong malinis yung commit history mo. And of course, pwede kang mag-cherry pick na kunin mo lang yung ilang commits from one branch and apply to another. For example, hindi mo kailangan yung iba. And hindi mo kailangan yung iba tapos mag-set ka ng bagong development based on just those na cherry pick mo. And kung gusto mo makita yung commit history and other stuff, get log and also get status. Yeah. Final note siguro, before I open din yung GitHub para makita nyo ilang examples. Yan. May ganitong shirt yung roommate ko nung college. na I think yung roommate ko ng college, ito sa shirts niya, tuwang-tuwa ako nun. I'm not pala. Yung background ko is hindi naman from a developer talaga. I wasn't a comp sci student, wasn't an IT student. I'm a geodetic engineer na natuwa sa development world. So, nag-transition into open source, open data, software development. Pero yung roommate ko, hilig niya talaga yung programming. And ito yung isa sa mga naalala ko tumatak sa akin na t-shirts niya. And it's true. If you work in open source, and if you work in the openness field, ang laki ng possibility for you to help others and for you to basically change the world. Hindi lang siya business, hindi lang siya enterprise. It's also a lot of advocacy work. It's also a lot of opportunities for you to help underprivileged or less privileged people, marginalized communities. In fact, a lot of the software development work sa humanitarian side ay open source, right? So, ang dami opportunities dito, and join us sa open source community, help us change the world. So there siguro, I would end with that. Maraming salamat. If there are questions, pwede naman.
Okay. So, first and foremost, thank you, Ben, for diba, sharing your knowledge with us. Nagkaroon kami ng parang additional na parang perspective about diba, open source. Ayan, so may questions pa tayo sa Michael, sa comment section?
Ayun, sorry karon ako may mga tayo dito, no? Maraming mga comments regarding dun sa ating talk with Ben Hur. Sabi, relate sa life daw. Sabi ni mga no? Tapos sabi ni Dev, so much interested. Interesado talaga dun sa talk natin. Actually, ako personally, gusto ko yung talk din kasi kumbaga it opens a different perspective kung yung open source. Dati, we get used about the technical aspect out of it, di ba? Pero ngayon, we deep dive between the conceptual, the theoretical, and the philosophical aspect kung ano ba talagang open source. No? Sabi naman ni Raymart, heart, open source. Sabi naman ni JC Kabili, most of the companies here in PH gusto open source and cost efficient. Number one, approve ng management. Basic example, cost of Windows Server versus Linux. Siguro, Ben-Hur, ano yung masasabi mo dito?
Sa akin, from experience lang, for my end, pagdating sa IT talaga in infrastructure, ang napansin ko, lamang talaga lamang yung Linux there. Internet is built on Linux servers basically. Siguro yung doon, yung hindi lang siya ganito is yung ibang enterprise solutions, especially sa government, and kasi karamihan sa kanila ang tanong pa rin when nagpo-procure is sino yung main company na magde-deal with them, plus ano yung kung capital outlay yung cost, ano yung cost nung enterprise software na yun. And a lot of my experiences working in open source and parang sa field na yan with government is mas gusto nila yung enterprise kasi una sa lahat may pwede silang issue pag nagka-problema, and pangalawa mas madali yung parang mas yung cost, mas alam nila agad sa start yung cost. In fact, parang mahirap actually pasukin yung ilang fields with purely open source dahil doon, kasi when you pag nagko-costing ka, hindi mo mahirap i-estimate kung yung actual cost talaga pag hindi siya tulad ng ganyan na IT infrastructure, like say software, magpo-procure ng software yung isang government entity. Naghahanap sila for example ng Office suite. Syempre Microsoft may cost siya per piece, di ba? Office may cost siya per piece or per license, ganyan. So madali nilang budgetan. If magsasabi kang okay, how about LibreOffice? Paano mo budgetan 'yon? at paano mo siya lalagyan ng cost na kumbaga magma-match din dun sa ano. So hopefully mas maraming maging ganun. Ay ang sure ako talaga 100% sa IT infrastructure, sa IT infrastructure, lamang na lamang yung Linux sa space na yun. Lamang na lamang talaga siya. But sometimes para dun sa mga software, mas gusto pa rin ng karamihan yung proprietary, which is why kung titingnan nyo siguro, ang dami naka-Microsoft OS sa gobyerno. Kahit XP pa siya, kahit updated na sila, Microsoft Windows 8, hindi pa rin sila nag-update. So sana magbago, and it's one of the things na gusto nating makita syempre sa space na to, na mas lumawak, mas marami yung gumamit din ng open source, not just individual users but especially yung mga bigger users natin like schools, government offices, LGUs, etc.
Okay, good. Thank you. Sabihin daw ni JC din, Sir Kali, bakit di mo ginamit?
Kali Linux daw.
Kali Linux. Nood kayo ng nasa Netflix pa ata, Mr. Robot. Kali yung gamit niya daw.
Tapos sabi ni Reka, Heart. Ayan. Sabi naman ni Warren, parang corn plus hub. Corn hub. Ano kaya itong corn hub na ito?
Yung corn hub. Buhay pa ba yun? Buhay pa ba siya? Meron ganun dati. Puro lang ng videos ng corn. Meron nga dati Pom Hub Pom Hub. Di ko alam kung buhay pa yun. Puro lang Poms.
Okay. Sige. Parang code spaces daw.
Oo.
Sabi ni Larry, Master Warren Gonzaga. Siguro kakapanood ng Pornhub. Master. Wag mo ituro, sabi ni JC, wag mo ituro forcer. Okay?
Kasi sa Git may force, diba? Kaya lang, delikado yun kasi, diba? May unintended consequences yun pag hindi mo alam
kung sa'yo lang. Kung personal repository mo, sige lang. Pero kung hindi, wag. Use with caution. Use force with caution.
Sabi ni Dev Markup, Delic Caves pag may conflicts ang -F. Sabi ni Larry, magdasal bago mag-force. Okay. Meron palang dark side ito, no? Tama
dark side of the force.
May dark side pala itong force na ito, no? Delikado. May question si Vin. Anong kadalasan security vulnerabilities ang nakakalimutan ng maintainers at contributors? At paano natin ito may iwasan?
Yun. Ganda yung tanong. Ako, with this, I go back dun sa may kaibigan ako na InfoSec talaga yung focus niya. And ang sabi niya sa akin, yung when it comes to security and privacy, especially in software, ang titingnan mo talaga is gaano kadalas rini-review yung code, at kung gaano siya ka-open. Pwedeng sobrang swerte mo na open na nga yung code, madalas pa rin yung review. I think isa sa mga ganun would be Signal, yung messaging app. Open source sila, at the same time alam ko very very consistent yung review nila nung source code nila. Pero kung hindi man, you prefer na madalas or consistent and regular yung review ng source code. Kasi yung sabi niya sa akin, if I remember asking him kasi yung proprietary versus open source security, sabi niya both of them naman have flaws and limitations, pero ang gusto mong tingnan is how open sila, gaano nila kadalas ginagawa yung review, tapos gaano sila ka-open ilabas yung results ng review na yun. Kasi kahit din naman like proprietary software, sige, hindi natin makita yung source code nila, pero kung madalas silang mag-review at madalas silang linalabas yung results ng review na yun, at least meron hindi opaque para sa atin yung security nila. So open source ganun din. And on the flip side, mas importante nga yung consistent na review para sa open source. Kasi dati na nating kita yung source code, transparent na siya. Ang ano lang dyan, and yung funny is, sabi nga, just because andyan yung software, andyan yung source code, at ang daming matang tumitingin, doesn't mean may nagre-review ng security niyan. So, doon pa rin yung ano natin, doon pa rin dapat uh, yung focus din. From a personal, kumbaga as a developer, a single developer ng isang software, you maintain your own, kumbaga way to maintain yung security ng code, but at the same time, as a community dapat kumbaga nag-agree kayo na okay, every 3 months or so, every 6 months, kailangan nating i-review for vulnerabilities. Kasi kahit open source yan, hindi naman ibig sabihin na araw-araw may tumitingin yan for vulnerabilities eh. Lalo na kung unpaid work yun. Right? Matrabaho kaya yun. I mean, kung titihimayin mo kung may possible vulnerabilities yung ano. So, ang ano doon is, if as a community, baka pwede kayong mag-agree na every 3 months, every 6 months, let's do a code review. Tingnan natin kung may vulnerabilities tayo na pasok na nakalusot dun sa mga sa mga review natin ng mga PRs natin and sa mga changes na in-input natin. Pero very important yun, and that's a very good question. It's a very good question kasi madalas din yan itanong yung security ng open source and security ng closed source, and paano mo ba sila paano mo sila titingnan na in the same lens.
Alam mo, magandang point yan din. Kasi first of all, dapat nire-review naman talaga no?
Oo.
Dapat naman talaga nire-review. Hindi pwede magpa-publish ka lang dyan na without even thinking, reading the second time around. And most especially, meron kang proofreader na tinatawag. Ano palagay mo doon, Denver? Proofreader. Diba?
Ang ano ko nga I mean, ang sa communities that I'm part of, sa ang ano talaga is as a starting committer, yung hindi ka pa core committer, ano ka lang talaga contributor. Meron talagang mag-guide sa iyo na core contributor na siya talaga magre-review ng lahat ng lahat ng ipo-push mo. And sometimes yun din, going back to sa sinabi kong openness as a community. Minsan yun din yung nagpapabagal din sa development cycle talaga. Kasi kung meron ka lang isang dalawang nagre-review to make sure na maayos yung mga pinupush or mga linalagay na update sa software nyo, babagal talaga yung development cycle nyo. So, yun nga, it's a community. It's really about working together and making sure na yung newer generation na papasok, kayang palitan yung trabaho mo basically. Kasi kung hindi, magsa-stagnate yung project. Tulad ng sinabi rin ni Warren kanina, 'di ba? Almost papatay na yung pero nung dumating yung bagong generation, syempre mabubuhay uli yan. So ganun yung kailangan natin gawin. I-foster talaga yung community around yung mga open source projects na gusto nating ma-keep na buhay, kumbaga.
Tsaka may additional si Warren. Ayan. So meron daw initiative sa security. So hunter.dev. Ayan. So mga open source daw dapat may security.mv. Tsaka bawal i-disclose yung anything na security related. Yan. Ito siguro last question na, no? Ilang taon na daw po kayo na developer?
Malalaman
kung okay lang. Okay lang na
ang mahirap din i-define siguro kung kung dev, yung time ko as a dev. Kasi sabi ko, nag-start ako, yung degree ko talaga is genetic engineering. Siguro a few years after graduation, saka lang ako nag-go into really into yung open source field. And then ngayon nag-transition na rin ako more into advocacy and but probably mga 5 to 10 years working on open source for geospatial projects, mga around that time. So ngayon meron pa rin ako mga hinahawakang projects na purely dev, like mga data platforms and stuff, pero hindi na technically hindi na full time na ganun yung ginagawa ko. I also have a lot of trainings na din, tsaka yun, advocacy work talaga to push for open source. So yun din, kung hindi tayo developers pero gusto pa rin nating tumulong sa community, ang daming avenues na pwede nating puntahan or gawin, kumbaga.
Tsaka soon enough, no? Parang invalid na yung like ilang taon ka na-develop kasi kahit yung mga bata ngayon may scratch na.
May scratch. Parang
mm.
iba na yung word na developer ngayon, 'di ba? Dati kaya mo mag-set up ng ano. Tapos sobrang specialized na rin ngayon right? You have front-end devs, you have back-end devs, you have full stack devs. Ako, lahat 'yun na pagdaanan ko. Nagba-back-end ako. I also do middleware, I also do front-end. So parang hindi lahat sila ngayon sabay-sabay na, pero ando na nga tayo sa point na parang at an early stage tas iba na rin yung definition mo ng dev sa ano as someone na working sa software world siguro.
Okay. So mag-ubos na tayo ng konting shoutouts. So sabi ni Reka, thank you po sa pag-share ng info today. Sabi naman ni Selyun, thank you for the great talk. Marami daw siyang natutunan. Sabi naman ni Larry, yan, very informative, sir. Yan, okay. So, any last tips?
Sige. Yung very last, yung, dapat pala yun yung ginamit ko last sa, sa presentation ko kanina. Pero, sa start, sa start madali, until ma-reach mo yung first na, na wall. But, i-pursue nyo lang. Kasi masaya talaga. Especially kung mahilig kayo mag-tinker. Promise. Kung mahilig kayo mag-tinker ng mga bagay-bagay, open source is for you. Sobrang daming pwedeng gawin dito. And we welcome everyone.
Ayan, pahabol si JC. Ayan, that's the real CTO all around.
Mahirap din.
Okay, so before tayo mag-end ulit, meron ka bang i-announce or like where they can find you if may tanong sila?
Sige, tulad kanina sa you can find me on GitHub, benhor07b, on Facebook BNHR, on Twitter bnhr.xyz, on YouTube yun din, bnhrdotxyz.
Okay, so kagaya kanina, may picture. So, ganun din ulit.
Pakahirap.
To celebrate Hacktoberfest. Ayan, saan ba yan? Michael, nawawala ka.
Oo nga.
Ito pala mas malapit.
Naglabo yung aking salamin.
Okay,
ito pala mas malapit. Naganon ko yung kamay ko.
Okay. Count tayo ng 3. 1, 2.
Let's vault in.
Let's
vault in.
Yan. Okay.
Yun. Maraming salamat.
Thank you.
Thank you for
sana,
having me.
ma-invite ka namin ulit in the future.
Yeah, sure. Maraming salamat. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so, kamusta naman yon Michael? Dami din nating, di ba, parang, yung una kasi parang may dilema kami na parang pareho yata yung topic nila. Pero iba, di ba, parang para siyang yung open source, para siyang parang pag-ibig yan, di ba? May kanya-kanya tayong, di ba, definition, may kanya-kanya tayong experience. So parang kanina nakuha natin yung experience ni Warren. Ito naman nakuha natin yung experience ni di ba, ng speaker natin. So ni Ben, ayun. Before tayo mag-proceed sa next speaker natin, syempre, saan naman tayo pakita natin yung ating screen. Nahanap yung screen ko, nawawala eh. So, tuloy-tuloy pa rin tayo, no? So, we want your feedback and you'll also get to win a prize. Maraming salamat sa speaker natin na nandito na, ibigay ng ticket for Softcon. So, si Seiji, ayan. So, we want your feedback, no, kung na-enjoy niyo ba yung talk kanina. Ayan, mafi-fill up niyo form later. So, mamimigay din kami, courtesy of Seiji, ayan, for the ticket for Softcon 2021. Kung gusto niyo umattend dyan, ayan, may 3 tickets na pamimigay kami. Ayan, so, ano ba yung Softcon? Conference siya for software and IT professionals and organization ng PSIA. Ayan. So, paano mag-join or paano kayo magbigay ng feedback mamaya? So, nod kayo ng live stream, ginagawa nyo ngayon, yan, tuloy nyo lang yan. Tapos mag-announce kami ng code, i-announce namin yung second code in a few. Tapos, visit nyo yung app na app.pwpilipinas.org, gumawa kayo ng account, tapos sa events tab, may Hacktoberfest celebration tayo doon na event, select nyo yun, tapos click nyo yung register, tapos fill up nyo lang yung feedback form, tapos ilagay nyo doon yung code. Yan. So, pipili kami ng 3 winners na i-announce namin sa October 17. So, mag-open yung feedback form after ng talk ni Seiji and magko-close siya mamayang 12 midnight. Yan. To qualify, dapat at least dalawang code yung ano nyo, no? Siyempre, dapat po, di ba? May challenge konti. Ayan. So, ano ba siya, no? Ito yan, no? Visit nyo lang app.pwpilipinas.org. Kung naka-Google Play kayo, may Android app. May Android app kami. Yan. Download nyo lang. Yan. Or sa Microsoft Store. Ayan. Andyan din siya. Tapos, may mga hindi ako nasabi kanina. Nahanap ko siya. Wala pa din siya. Ayan. Meron kaming community pledge kung gusto niyo ng additional entry para sa Hacktoberfest na shirt and goodies. Yan. Pwede kayong maglagay ng pledge nyo dyan as mag-open kayo ng pull request. Yan. I-accept namin yan. Definitely. Ayun. Yun lang ba? Ayan. Yun lang. So, yan. Paano natin? Introduce mo na yung speaker natin, Michael. Dahil sobrang proud tayo dito.
Oo. Talagang proud na proud ako sa next speaker natin, guys. Ano? Dahil isa siyang graduated na cum laude with a degree in Bachelor of Science in Computer Science at the University of Santo Tomas. And he is currently a senior software engineer at Smart Byte, Malaysia.
Parang may boxing.
Ano to? Naku, pati yung pronunciation ko, hindi ko maayos-ayos. Ambassador and one of the community leaders of Angular PH, who is involved at organizing tech meetups, mentorship, and has written tutorials in his own website. He has been also a speaker in several events and conferences in the Philippines and abroad. At saka naging mentor natin siya ng mga iba't ibang hackathons like Space Apps and Impact Hackathon. Talagang well-supported by the community. At ituturo niya sa atin kung paano mag-deploy on Azure Static Web Apps. No? Paano kaya mag-deploy? Andre? Gusto mo bang malaman?
Oo naman. Para daw naka-censored sa sabi ni Ven, ayan, parang naka-censored si Sir sa kanan.
Kaya nga eh.
Parang actually, whistleblower.
Actually, kung sinasabi ni Ven, kung sinasabi ni kanina, no, may mga dilema, no, si Andre. Ako naman ang dilema ko yung aking webcam, no. Hindi ko na bakit naglabo yung aking webcam, no. Mamaya ayusin natin yan. Okay. Sige, so
silagay natin sa stage.
So let's welcome our next speaker, Seiji Villafranca.
Hello, Seiji.
Hi, Andre. Hi, Lance. Good evening.
And congratulations sa pagiging Microsoft MVP.
Yeah, thank you.
So, congratulations. Binabati ko.
Welcome ka sa PWA Pilipinas.
Yeah. Naman, sobrang thank you. So, parang ilang beses na ako nag-talk dito. Honor. It's an honor na maraming natutulungan sa mga topic. Ayan.
Okay. Gusto nila matuto ng
Azure. Actually, yung sa akin yung pinaka-naiiba eh. Pero medyo related siya sa, actually si Microsoft, one of the, siya yung nag-acquire kay GitHub. So, siya yung napili ko na i-present ngayon para sa topic. So, kung nandito na kayo sa open source, bakit hindi natin ipagyabang naman yung mga nagawa natin sa open source? So, ide-deploy natin siya ngayon sa Azure Static Web Apps. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I can start na siguro dun sa topic. Okay. Yeah. So, my screen is on live now. Yeah. Ayan. Once again, good evening, everyone. So, I'm Seiji Villafranca as being introduced by Lance and Andre kanina. So, yeah. I will be talking about deploying on Azure on static web apps. So, this is kind of different. Kanina, ang diniscuss at in-explain ni Sir Warren tsaka ni Sir Ben-Hur is about open source. Yan, kung paano tayo gumamit ng Git and specifically or particularly about GitHub and yan, paano tayo mag-contribute. So, may mga questions kasi tayo basically kung as one of the developers, ano ba yung mga kailangan natin usually? So isa na dito yung sa pag-deploy. So kung nasa open source tayo or kailangan natin mag-deploy ng apps, so may mga existing clouds na diyan, cloud deployments or cloud service platform. And one of the famous cloud service platform is Azure. So I will be just talking about Azure in a short period of time. So maiksi lang to. Alam ko gabi na guys. And yeah, I'll be going directly forward to our topic. Yeah, so once again, I'm CG Villafranca and I'm a senior software engineer in SmartByte Malaysia, and I'm one of the Microsoft MVP here in the Philippines. And also, I'm an Auth0 ambassador and the community lead of Angular PH. So if you will want to ask what am I doing as a Microsoft MVP, so I share talks in communities, meetups, seminars, and conferences, not just about Microsoft or Windows, anything that has to do with development. So, ayun, nakita nyo, I'm also community lead of Angular Philippines. So, mostly mga makikita nyo sa mga talk ko, basically, it's about Angular, TypeScript, and nagre-react din ako in React Native. So, mostly JavaScript and Node.js. Yan. So, yun yung mga mostly na tinotalk ko. But, yeah, I'm also talking about Azure services. Yeah, and kung gusto nyo balikan yung mga dati kong naging talks, actually madami-dami na kung tatanungin nyo ako kung ilan. Hindi ko masasagot yung eksaktong numbers kung ilan yung mga napunta akong conferences and meetups. I've been to Angular Philippines, syempre my home community, and DevCon. So I've been there several times. React.js Pilipinas, Rock Squad, startup company. And abroad also, I've been to NGUp. It's a conference in Israel, so it's Angular Up. So para siyang NG Vikings, but it's like a branch. And yeah, Softcon 2020, and this year I will be also speaking at Softcon 2020. So JavaScript and Friends, it's also international. It's in Ohio, and yeah, currently in PWA Pilipinas. Yep. So yeah, enough about me. So diretso na tayo dun sa topic natin. So kung tatanungin natin ano ba talaga si Azure, sa mga hindi pa nakakaalam, it's a cloud computing platform, just like AWS and Google Cloud Platform. Ano ba yung mga kayang i-offer ni Azure? Yeah, it's an infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So kung i-differentiate natin yung tatlo, software as a service is like a third-party application na ini-install natin para mas mapadali yung development natin. So platform as a service, it's like the cloud deployment itself. So dito tayo nagde-deploy ng mga services at the same time yung mga websites natin. And infrastructure as a service, yeah, it's Azure itself and AWS. Yeah, the services that Azure offered, marami siya actually. Ang pagkakalam ko, it's about 200 plus. So kahit ako personally, kung tatanungin nyo, hindi ko pa siya nagagamit lahat kasi sobrang dami. Even there's a wide range of services that are being offered. And hindi lang siya around for web development. Meron din siyang machine learning at the same time artificial intelligence for storages and networking also. So it's around 200 plus platforms. So yun, meron siyang machine learning, database hosting, so meron siyang common na MS SQL, so meron din tayo ng mga SQL management, and meron din Cosmos DB or what we also know as the NoSQL for Azure. Then also web hosting and API functions. So mapapansin natin is naka-highlight si web hosting kasi dito tayo magfo-focus, which is si Azure Static Web Apps. Okay. Yeah. So kung titingnan nyo, 200 plus services na yung ino-offer ni Azure. Yeah, I can consider it as a one-stop shop. So lahat ng pwede natin gawin or lahat ng needs natin for web development and other than web development or mobile development also is nandito na lahat yung needs natin. Yeah, it's place everything in one platform. So kung as one of the developers or just software developer, ano ba yung mga common need ng developers when in terms of building your application? So you need to deploy your web apps on a lightning speed. So common dilemma sa atin dito is mahirap mag-set up like the CI/CD, and yeah, the YAML, it's a headache. Even on my experience, sobrang hirap mag set up, configure ng mga YAML, yung mga CI/CD. So sobrang sakit sa ulo. So even though that we are developers, sometimes meron din dapat talaga tayong idea dun sa DevOps part niya. So para mas maintindihan natin kung paano ba din i-deploy yung isang platform, yung isang application. So yun yung common na kailangan natin dito. Lalo na kung kunyari sa mga projects natin na gusto natin i-deploy or if we are freelancers, so naghahanap tayo ng mga tools na madali ang i-deploy at ma-set up yung mga build natin. Yeah. So, this is currently happening in our time. Kala natin, okay pa. Hindi natin alam. Nasusunog na yung app natin. So, yeah. Deployment services. Actually, Azure is offering several deployment services in their platform. So, number one is Static Web Apps. Actually, si Static Web Apps is one of the newest services that Azure is offering in terms of deployment services. Then, yung common is Web Apps and Azure Blob Storage Static Website. So, currently na tanong dito is, ang dami nilang in-offer, ano ba yung pinagkaiba nila? So, yun yung current na, or ayun yung common question na pwede nyo itanong sa akin. So, si Static Web Apps actually is later, mas malalaman natin kung ano yung pinagkaiba niya. So, si Web Apps, usually, same, ito yung parang pinaka-common ground. So, dito hindi lang siya for front-end, but also for the needs of deploying back-end and API services. So, basically, that's Web App. So, si Azure Blob Storage Static Website, ito yung parang pinaka-classic. So, it's like just deploying your files on manually. So, hindi niya sinusupport yung mga CI/CD as well as yung mga GitHub Actions. So, it's like, ito yung kung babalikan natin yung mga year of 20 forgotten, ito yung time na parang nag-FTP lang tayo. So minamanual natin ilagay yung mga files natin dun sa platform. So, balik tayo kay Static Web Apps. So, si Static Web Apps, sabi ko nga, siya yung isa sa pinakabagong service na ino-offer ni Azure ngayon. So, it's released on May 12, 2021. So, just this year. And, yeah, ano ba yung mga use and advantages niya? Bakit, since may web app na si Azure, meron ng static site, and meron na rin mga app services. So, bakit sila nag-release ng Static Web Apps? So, Static Web Apps is mainly used for hosting your static site. So, as the name itself, Static Web Apps, meron siya yung may capability mag-host ng mga static sites, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and such. So, yun. Ano yung pinaka-advantage niya is it is integrated easily with GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps. So, mamaya, ipapakita ko yung konting demo paano ba natin i-utilize si GitHub Actions and si Azure DevOps pagdating sa pag-deploy ng mga apps natin. So, yeah, GitHub is now from Microsoft. So, na-integrate na ni Azure yung mga GitHub Actions dito. See? And hindi na natin problema yung mga latest front-end frameworks right away because Azure Static Web Apps, it supports most latest front-end frameworks like Angular, React, Vue, and even Svelte. Sinusupport niya na lahat yun. Even the other static rendering like Gatsby and and such. So, yun. Usually, sinusupport na ni Azure. So, in terms of deployment, hindi na natin kailangan mismo pumunta sa portal pagdating sa pag-set up, configure nung deployment natin, nung app natin. So, si Azure, since it's from Microsoft and VS Code is from Microsoft, so they have integrated na yung mga tools para ma-deploy in VS Code. So, nag-provide na sila ng extensions para dun sa deployment natin. So, parang kay VS Code, dun na natin lahat ginagawa. And at the same time, makikita rin natin yung yung progress ng build natin. So, nandun na rin lahat yung mga GitHub Actions natin. So, naka-reflect na lahat dun. So, di na natin kailangan pumunta dun sa portal. Okay. Yeah, and it offers free SSL certificate. So, for HTTPS deployment. So, pwede natin gawin yan kay Azure. Yeah. So, explain lang natin in just simple terms, ano ba yung flow ni Azure Static Web Apps. So, it supports code changes. So, kapag nag-change tayo ng code dun sa ating repository, it will detect the code changes and the build of GitHub Actions, or kung ginamit natin si GitHub Actions or ginamit natin si Azure DevOps or Azure Pipelines, so mag-trigger yung build and it will run the commands or any the pipelines at the steps under your pipelines kung ano man yun, depending on your framework. So matitrigger yan. And once the build is finished, so it will be deployed on our Azure Static Web Apps. So the static contents, it's HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So same naman kahit ano namang mga framework yung ginagamit natin. And at the same time, wrong spelling. So it's Azure Functions. Ito pa yung isa actually sa mga pinaka-benefit ni Azure Static Web Apps compared dun sa other services. So kung may existing kang Azure Functions for monitoring, pwede natin siya integrate directly dun sa Azure Static Web Apps. Yeah. So if you want to start deploying your app inside your GitHub or any other repositories like Azure repository, so ano ba yung mga kailangan natin? Siyempre, kailangan natin ng Azure account. So kung tatanungin nyo, most kasi ang common norm kay Azure account is kala nila may bayad. So if you are a student, actually meron silang ino-offer na free student plan. So makikita natin yan mamaya dun sa portal. And yun, sa Azure DevOps din, pwede rin kayong humingi ng mga parallel jobs or kung plano nyo gumamit ng pipelines ni Azure DevOps. So meron din sila mga parallel plans. May fill-upan lang kayong form around that. Then si GitHub, syempre, developers tayo, we need GitHub account and VS Code. So dito natin isa-set up yung pag-deploy ng Azure in yung Azure Static Web Apps. Then for VS Code extension, we only need two. So it's Azure Tools and Azure Static Web Apps. Okay, so if you want to explore or you want to create your account, just go to portal.azure.com. So dito natin makikita yung mga services. Once you've created your account, dito natin may explore lahat ng mga in-offer ni Azure. Okay. So first, sabi ko kanina, if where do you want to place your code, you can use GitHub. So ang gagamitin nating build pipelines dito is yung kay GitHub Action, and next is yung kay Azure Pipelines. So dalawang way, and if your code is on GitHub, so we will be using GitHub Actions. Okay, so papakita ko lang. This is just the simple step of deploying your app. So in our visual code, so this is our visual code here. So kung dito gumawa lang ako ng sobrang simpleng website. So wala tong framework. So makikita niyo dito, it's just Azure Demo Static and meron tayong SRC file. Then sa index, yan, makikita lang natin na simpleng HTML. So Azure site and Azure site is here. So di ba gumawa pa ako ng styles. Kunyari, CSS talaga tayo dito. So kung gusto natin i-deploy itong very simple website natin, itong simple website natin to sa pupunta sa Azure Static Web Apps. So kailangan lang natin mag-install. Yes?
Hindi yata nakita yung
Oh yeah, sorry. Hindi pala ako nakaano.
Salamat.
Sige. Naka-share pala yung isa ko. Sorry about that. Yan. Yeah, thank you, Andre. So, okay na, no? Kita na ulit. Yeah. So, balik tayo dun. Yan. Sorry about that. Nakalimutan ko na kaya stop lang pala ako ng Chrome. So, balik tayo. So, dito tayo sa Visual Studio Code ulit. So, makikita natin dito is gumawa lang ako ng website. Simple lang. Wala tong framework, walang Angular, React, and such. So, yung Azure Demo Static, so this is my folder. So, yan. Makikita nyo index.html lang siya. And here, makikita natin, sobrang simple lang, di ba? Kunyari, nag-code talaga tayo. So, it's the Azure site and Azure site is here. So, kunyari, may styles pa. Just very simple. So, ang kailangan lang natin para dito sa Visual Studio Code natin is the tools or the extensions that we need. So, ito yung mga sinabi ko kanina. So, dalawa lang siya. So, dito sa extensions, hanapin lang natin Azure Tools. So, this is the Azure Tools. So, this is free. You're free to install it on VS Code. And this is the Azure Tools. So, once you installed it, automatically lalabas tong tab na to sa atin. So, makikita natin, meron na tayong resource group, help, yung mga services nila like functions, static web app, storage, and database. Then next is, kailangan natin ng static web app. So currently, kung pag in-install nyo tong Azure Tools is, hindi talaga natin siya makikita tong static web apps dito sa tab na to. Nakahiwalay siya in terms of extension. So ang isa-search natin is Azure Static. There. So makikita natin, ito yung Azure Static Web App. So actually, I've also installed it already. So makikita natin, once na ma-install si Azure Static Web Apps is lalabas na siya dito. Yan. Okay. So, in this case, may mga nakakonect na akong subscription. So, important reminder guys, pag gagamit kayo ng static web app is kailangan nyo ng existing subscription. So, actually may bayad talaga siya, pero meron tayong mga plans like trials and students to use this subscription. Itong sa akin, it's for my MVP. So, nagagamit ko siya. So, ito yung privilege nandun sa Azure Static Web Apps. So, next, once we are done, so ang gagawin natin is ko-connect tayo dito sa subscription natin. I'll just siguro i-zoom ko ng onte para makita. I'm not sure kasi kung sobrang linaw niya sa screen. So, yan. So, I have two subscriptions. I'll just select the Visual Studio. Okay. Tingnan natin. So, balik tayo dun. So, gamit tayo ng, let's just use this Azure Demo Static. So, there, after that, kung nakuha na, nilagay na natin yung pangalan ng repository. So, papapiliin ka lang niya ng server, what region. So, it's East Asia. And let's use the custom since we're not using other frameworks. So yun, kung makikita nyo, almost all frameworks are supported by Azure Static Web Apps. Then for this one, this is the root. So let's just try source and build. So makikita natin, actually automatic lahat yan. Wala akong ginawa, hindi ako nag-open ng GitHub repository, hindi ako nag-create ng GitHub repository. So automatically magpupush yan sa repo na sa GitHub account natin. Yun, important reminder also, dapat naka-connect yung GitHub account natin kay VS Code. So mapapansin natin na nagpupush na siya nag-create na siya nung repository at the same time nag-push na siya nung code natin dun sa GitHub. So, nasabi ko kanina na makapapansin natin, na makikita natin yung Azure Demo Static App natin dito sa panel natin. So, lahat ng actions is makikita natin. So, ito yung kanina. So, let's go down. Yan. So, mapapansin natin na meron na tayong bagong repo dun sa GitHub account natin. So, this is the code or this is the repository. Na-push na natin siya at the same time. Nagbi-build na siya sa Azure Static Web Apps. So, si actions, kung mapapansin nyo, nandito lahat ng builds. So, hindi ko na kailangan pumunta sa GitHub. So, nandito lahat yung mga progress kung nag-success ba siya and yung build niya. If you want to verify, pwede naman natin puntahan. Mapapansin natin dito sa GitHub. So, let's check. So, ito yung ginawa natin. Oh, sorry, mali. Ito. Demo. Yan. So, ito yung pinush natin kanina. So, mapapansin natin dito sa actions is yan. Naunahan niya pa ako, nag-build na siya. And yeah, makikita natin na nag-build na rin yung app natin and automatically deployed na siya. So, kung makikita natin sa Visual Studio Code, nag-check na rin siya dito sa panel natin. So, paano natin siya mapupuntahan? So, let's go to Portal Azure. So, in Portal Azure, so guys, kung bago kayo sa Azure, ito yung currently na makikita nyo. honestly, nung una ako nag-Azure, sobrang sakit sa ulo niya. Same with AWS. Kasi, alam yan, sobrang overload, na-overload kasi information. Ano ba yung kailangan kong gamitin dito? Ang hirap, nakakalito. Minsan nakaka-bad trip. Ano ba yung pupuntahan mo? So, ang daming services, but don't worry. Kahit ako, hindi ko alam lahat. So, I'm just using the tools or the services that I really need. So, currently, mga nagamit kong service dito is the static web app. So, for our community. Then, the functions, app services for deploying APIs. And also, nagagamit na rin ako dito ng machine learning. So, just some open source projects. Yun. Ang downside lang talaga ni Azure is the more services that you're using, syempre, the more cost. Yun talaga yung pinaka-downside niya. Same naman dahil diba kahit sa ibang cloud platform. So, yun. Punta tayo sa static web apps. So, actually, nandito na siya. So, pakita ko lang din. Meron naman tayong search dito. So, static web apps. So, dito sa part na to, makikita natin na nag-deploy na si Azure Demo Static. So, yeah. Ito yung makikita natin. Andito na yung mga analytics. So, ito rin yung isa sa mga actually na advantage na. So, meron tayong mga analysis dito kung ano yung ilan yung request na nangyari dun sa app natin. And at the same time, may mga access control and role management for our application. So, next, let's just browse kung tama ba talaga. Yun. So, nung nag-browse ako dun sa app, we have our own HTTPS website already. So, ganda ng website, di ba? Sobrang clean. Kahit walang design. Ayan. So, yeah. That's the simple way to deploy a website in Azure. So, isang way lang yun, using GitHub Actions. So, same lang naman siya. Ang importante lang natin kailangan isipin dito is, ang tanong natin is, paano kung meron tayong mga gamit na frameworks? So, isipin lang natin, isipo-point lang natin yung pinaka-root dun sa merong index.html. So, usually, like Angular, meron tayong build file. So, meron din namang index.html yun. So, ituturo lang natin dun. So, para mas maintindihan nyo pa siguro, I'll just demo deploying Angular application. Pero ngayon, gagawa tayo nung Angular Static Web App dun sa portal. At the same time, gagamit tayo nung Azure DevOps. So, gumawa na ako ng isang Angular application here. Let's see. I think this is this one. Yan. So, nag-generate na ako ng Angular application. So, guys, if you're a React developer or Angular, actually same lang naman din halos. Ang pinagkaiba lang dito is how we do the pipelines. So, in this case, gagawa tayo ng repository for this project. So, let's just create one. So, punta tayo sa Azure DevOps. So, Azure DevOps actually, guys, it's also free. So, you can use it on your projects. If I'm not mistaken, at least 3, parang maximum of 3 yata yung free for Azure DevOps. So, meron din tayo mga Kanban board dito. So, gawa lang tayo ng repository. Hiram na lang tayo ng project. So, let's create a repo. So, let's create this sample repo. Angular demo static. So, next, gawin natin itong origin. Publish natin yung changes. Okay. So, once na-publish natin, tayo. So, never mind that. Hindi naka-default yung master. So, makikita natin, naka-publish na yung changes natin for this Angular demo static. So, same lang din to. Same concept as GitHub. So, nandito yung repository natin. So, next na kailangan natin gawin is gawa tayo nung Azure Static Web App dun sa portal. So kanina, ang ginawa natin, dumiretso tayo sa Visual Studio Code. Ngayon, mismo dito tayo gagawa sa dun sa Azure portal. So we can also use this one. So punta tayo sa Static Web Apps, then create. So actually same, almost same yung gagawin natin. So Azure demo natin ito. Yeah. Sige, kami na lang tayo na existing. Then next, let's just make it the same. So yan, mapapansin natin. So dito mapapansin natin na it's free. So let's just select the free for hobby personal projects and ibahin lang natin, gawin natin is Asia. So instead of using GitHub, we will use others. So may papansin niyo natin dito sa baba na for Azure DevOps, kailangan others, not GitHub. And yeah, review create. So here's the subscription, resource group, and name. And create yung Azure Static Web Apps. Okay. So yeah, our deployment is complete. So ito na yung pinaka Azure Static Web App natin. So balik tayo dun sa pinaka list. Excuse me. Yan. So gamit na lang tayo siguro nung existing. Yan. So once na matapos yung deployment, so gamit na tayo nung pinaka-existing. Same lang naman. So ito yung makikita natin. So Angular Azure Awesome App. So ang kailangan lang natin dito is the deployment token. Then let's just copy it on the clipboard. So next is kailangan na natin i-set up yung build sa Azure DevOps. So in setup, just click the setup build in the repository. So meron na siyang mga configuration. So makikita natin is it offers different kind of build. So hindi na natin kailangan isulat yung YAML by scratch. So meron na siyang automatic configuration. So sa Node.js, mapapansin natin Node.js with Angular. So mapapansin natin na yung scripts is naka-provide na. We just need to install the CLI, install all the dependencies, and use the ng-build -- prod. So mag-a-add lang ako dito ng onte. So I'll just copy-paste this. And I'll explain. So yung task, naglagay lang ako ng bagong task. Pangalan niya is Azure Static Web App. Then next is, ano yung inputs niya? So app location, basically it's the root. Then the output location is the build file. So paano natin malalaman yung pangalan nito? So depending on your framework. So sa atin ngayon is naka-Angular tayo. So paano ba malalaman yun? So sa angular.json, pupunta lang tayo doon and titingnan natin yung output path. So this is the output path. So in this case, papalitan natin to. Then, this Azure Static Web Apps API token. So, ito yung pinaka-parang communication natin between the Azure Static Web Apps and this build or this CI/CD. So, naglagay lang ako ng variable. So, it's $deployment_token. So, may kinopy tayo kanina. Copy ulit natin kasi nag-copy ako. So, this is the variable. So, new variable. So, ang pangalan niya is $deployment_token. Kung ano yung sinat natin. And copy lang. Then save. Yan. Then once done, save and run. Yan. And our pipelines are now set on our Azure pipelines. So actually, tapos na yan. Wala na akong kailangan gawin. And let's just have a coffee and wait for our build to finish. After that, mangyayari dyan is iraran niya lahat ng mga Node.js, install builder, it's successful and automatic. Once na matapos yung build niya is pupunta siya dito sa Angular Awesome App. So ayun, nag-build na yung Angular demo static 2 pero ginamit ko na lang tong existing. So automatic pupunta na siya dito sa made-deploy na siya dito sa Angular Azure Awesome app. Yeah. So makikita natin yung logs. It's installing and building, and ito yung custom na ginawa nating step or task para ma-set yung API location and yung build file para maturo natin kung nasan yung index HTML. Okay. So wait lang natin yan. So if you want to explore more pa on Azure, actually marami pa silang in-offer, lalo na sa students. So kung student pa kayo, meron silang offer na free credits for students. So grab it kasi it's a good start din for learning cloud platforms. So maraming cloud platforms. Actually, kung matututunan nyo yung isa na cloud platform, pag lumipat kayo, is madali nyo na matututunan yung concepts on how to deploy, how to use serverless functions as such and other parts. Other than that, like yung Lambda. So maraming they share the same concepts from GCP, AWS, and Azure. So once na mag-start kayo is ayun, magkakaroon na kayo ng idea na ito pala yung ganitong service and this is the counterpart on others. So it's really a good start. So grab it, and then ang sulitin nyo yung ino-offer ni Microsoft na free for students. Yan. So nag-fail siya kasi may gumagamit ng iba. So pwede ang itatry natin dyan, actually lilipat na lang natin. So manage yung deployment token. So let's edit the variables. Yan. Lipat na lang natin. And may nakalimutan ako kaya siya nag-fail. Kasi Angular 12 na tayo, dapat kailangan natin ng Node.js na 12. Yan. Okay. So, try natin ulit i-run. So, pakita ko na lang din yung pinaka-output. So, kumuha na rin ako ng output for this one. So, kung nag-deploy siya, so pag binarowse natin, yan. So ito, made-deploy na siya using HTTPS. So may SSL certificate na siya sa subdomain. And yeah, this is our application deployed on Angular Azure Static Web App. So ganun lang siya kabilis. No need for other setup or configuration. So automatically na-configure na siya kay GitHub Actions and sa Azure Pipeline. So ang ano lang nito, this is just the basic part. Kung meron pa tayong mga other complex actions na kailangan natin or other complex steps dun sa pipeline, syempre, kailangan natin i-set up yun dun sa YAML natin or sa GitHub Actions. So like, yeah, when you're developing React and Angular, syempre, meron pa tayong unit test. So kailangan natin ng run test or yung run natin yung Karma Jasmine or whatever we are using for unit testing. And other than that, gumagawa din tayo ng nightly builds o what we call E2E and lint also. So marami pa tayong pwedeng kailangan idagdag dun sa GitHub Actions. But yun na lang yung kailangan nating problemahin other than that. So hindi na natin masyado po problemahin yung pag-configure or pag-setup ng automatic builds or yung trigger ng deployment upon code changes. Yeah. So basically that's it for deploying Azure Static Web Apps with our websites or web apps or front-end web applications. So, just a summary, yun, na-deploy natin ulit kanina about using GitHub Actions and VS Code. So, not using the Azure portal itself. So, lahat nun, meron na tayong extensions and tools for VS Code. So, yun, kung gusto niyo, kung may mga projects kayo or may mga websites like that, so pwede nyo siyang i-deploy dun sa Azure using Static Web Apps and GitHub Actions. So if you want your project to be hosted on Azure, the DevOps itself, it also supports Azure pipelines. Yeah. And yeah, if you want to know more about some of the talks like JavaScript, Node.js, and even other cloud platforms. I'm not just talking about Azure. So marami din ako na experience na other platforms like AWS. So yeah, I can mentor. So you can reach me out on my GitHub. So CGV13. And I'm also a contributor of open source. So kung ang madalas ko na-contribute is about Angular. So kung may gumagamit kayo ng mga NG libraries like NGX Color, is contributor ako doon. And yeah, and in my website is cgvillafranca.com. I write tech contents and blogs about tech that I know. So one example is Angular and React.js. And if you also want to message me, kwentuhan, so facebook.com cg.villafranca. So may mga tanong pa kayo about sa dev or any tech stuff, yan. Yeah, you're free to reach me out. And yun, just a simple talk for Azure Static Web Apps. So, lang ko gabi na, and good night everyone. Sana marami kayong natutunan. And as Sheldon says, Bazinga.
Okay. So, first and foremost, no, salamat CG sa pagturo kung paano mag-deploy sa For sure maraming students na, 'di ba? Makakatulong talaga ito for them. So may questions tayo dito. Unahin natin 'to, no. Kailangan po ba ng credit card details para makagawa sa Azure?
Yeah. Yun. Hindi naman kailangan ng credit card details. Pero yung sa subscription, kailangan. Pero kasi yung pag in-explore nyo kay Azure sa portal, may mga ino-offer silang student plans. Hindi kailangan ng credit card yun for subscription. Yun yung nire-recommend ko talaga. Pero pag first user ka din ng Azure, meron silang offer na, hindi ko maalala kung ilang months. Parang 1 month yata trial din para din sa mga services nila.
Ayan, may question din tayo from Dev Markup. Ang pag-deploy ba sa Azure is like containerized?
Yes. Meron din silang ino-offer na containerized deployment kay Azure. So, pwede nyo rin siyang i-search. So, hindi yan kay Azure Static Web Apps. So, another service siya kay Azure. Like AWS, parang gano'n.
Okay. Ito siguro, no? Kung may questions kayo, i-comment nyo na. So, ito naman, kay Jim Burt. Ano, sir, advantage ng Azure Static Apps over Firebase hosting?
Yes. Actually, kung first, kasi ang usually kino-compare AWS Azure. Pero sa Firebase hosting actually, kasi yun, yung pinakita ko kanina, si Azure, integrated na siya kagad kay GitHub Actions. So, mapapansin nyo, may extensions na agad siya na ino-offer kay VS Code. Si Firebase kasi, for example, kay Angular, nagamit ko na rin siya, Angular Firebase. So, hindi siya automatically integrated like in GitHub Actions, CI/CD. So, may sarili kasi din siyang platform. So, yun yung isa sa mga advantages ni Azure kay Firebase. Another thing, for example, si Azure, yun ang banggit ko kanina, Azure Functions. So si Azure Functions, kung si-search na siya, it's more on API and monitoring. So meron ding automatic integration si Azure Static Web Apps pupunta kay Azure Functions. So kung naka-Azure Functions kayo, is mas madali siyang integrate compared to Firebase hosting.
Okay.
May,
Sa ano, no, sa Firebase hosting, meron siyang multiple site. Meron din ba sa static? Sa Azure Static?
Meron din, Andre. Dati naging talk ko yung Firebase yung sa, alam ko yun yung umabot na 3 hours. Meron din siyang CLI actually. Parehas sila ni Azure. So, ang maganda kay Firebase talaga kasi, meron sila ng mga real-time. Tapos meron din siyang NoSQL. And kung nag-Angular ka, may sarili siyang library na ginagamit. So, parang hindi mo na kailangan ng backend, Angular Fire. Hindi mo na kailangan ng backend doon kasi yung library na mismo yun. So, lahat, NoSQL siya kasi. Yun. Yung Angular na rin yung gagawa ng mga query. So, lahat nandun na. Nakakonect na siya.
Ikaw, Michael, may question?
Meron daw tanong si JC Mercado. Out of topic, pero anong language ang gamit mo for machine learning?
Python. Yes. Pero hindi ako yung mas expert talaga kasi software development talaga. Ano lang yan, pag wala akong magawa.
Galing.
Okay,
sabi
so
mo,
may mga
thank you daw.
shoutouts tayo.
The great team.
Asa na? Yan. Yan, thank you. Great info.
Thank you.
Para pa ba tayo?
Uy, speak of mentoring, baka pwede rin ako magpa-mentor Sir Sage.
Oo naman. Pa-mentor din ako.
Pa-mentor tayo kay Sage. Uy guys, magtanong-tanong kayo ngayon tapos mag-fill up kayo ng natin, feedback form. Baka kayo na ang manalo ng ticket sa Softcon, care of Sage.
Salamat sa tickets.
No problem. Magto-talk din pala ako doon. Plug.
Oo. I-plug mo na.
Yeah, mag-plug na rin ako. So magto-talk ako sa Softcon. Actually, hindi ko maalala yung yung schedule ko. Pero it's October 25 to 29. Maraming speakers doon. Actually, mga bigatin yung mga kasama doon. May mga taga-Netflix. Sobrang daming speakers doon around. So may mga kasama din ako doon na MVP din. So isa na doon si Stephen. So yan,
pili namin yun eh.
October 25 to 29. Tapos by first quarter next year, so nagsusulat ako ng libro actually. So promote ko na rin yun. It's about Java and Angular. So sana matapos ka agad, and yun. Sana akong
bestseller na agad yan.
Ano lang yan, for hub.
Wow. Okay, so may question pa tayo singit natin. Siguro last question na to. Ano kayang service sa sa Azure for microservice?
Yeah. Check nyo yung app services. Yung app services ni Azure. So, pwede siya for microservice architecture. So, si Static Web Apps, hindi yun for back-end. Ano lang yan. Parang Netlify, Netlify, GitHub Pages. So, kung additional info, ano ba yung pinagkaiba ni GitHub? Pakatanungin nila. May GitHub Pages naman, bakit may Azure Static Web Apps pa? Ayun, si GitHub Pages kasi hindi siya automatically direct din na integrate kay Azure Functions. Then other than that, yung GitHub Pages versus Azure Static Web Apps kasi alam ko yung mga tools niya na integrate siya automatically kay GitHub Actions.
Okay. So, okay na tayo. So, once again, salamat CG. Meron ka bang last na, meron ka bang tips or last words para sa ating audience?
Ayan, tips. Ako, since Hacktoberfest, continue contributing sa open source. Masaya yun. Kasi, actually ako, myself, contributor also ako ng open source software. Unang-una, dito tayo magkakaroon ng maraming connections. Then, community, na build up natin yung developer community. And mas napapabuti pa natin yung tech. So, dito tayo nagkakaroon ng maraming... Actually, natututo ako sa open source kasi dito ko nakikita yung codes ng iba. Natututo ako sa kanila. And, maraming experts kasi na dito nila... Ito yung one way of sharing their ideas and knowledge when it comes to development. So, itaguyod natin yung open source community. Lalo na yung GitHub, i-build up niya yan kasi importante din yan talaga sa sa background natin.
Okay. So before tayo mag closing remarks, may shout out pa daw si Dev Marco. Yan.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so picture na tayo.
Ayun, natin ko. Mali.
Ayan, sabayin to ba yun? Okay. Okay. Naka-ano ka, mute ka. Okay. Let's
vote.
In. Ayan, okay. Okay na. Thank you, Seiji.
Galing.
Thank you. Thank you, Andre.
Ay, thank you,
Okay,
Seiji.
so
Kami
Tama.
natutunan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Closing na tayo, Michael. May kasalanan ako. Hindi ko yata, napakataw ba yung second code ganina? Parang hindi, no?
Nako.
Ako
Ulitin na lang natin yung second code.
Hindi. I mean, minimum of 2 naman eh. So, okay lang.
Okay,
so,
sige.
Kung mapapanood itong dalawang to, ayan. Basta ilagay nyo lang yung you matter at saka it's okay. Diba? Kasi ano ngayon yung national, ano ba ngayon? National, ano yun? Mental Health Day today. So, oo. Kaya magpahinga kayo, diba?
Ano ngayon?
So, yung code number 2, you matter. Number 3, it's okay. Yan. Yung number 1, ayan. Kung naabutan nyo yung kanina, hindi na bibigay. Nakapakita natin kanina. Etong ngayon lang, yan, bonus na to sa lahat ng nagstay, sa lahat ng naging loyal.
Nagtyaga.
Tapos yung nagtyaga, nakinig. Oo. Na-absorb lahat ng open source idea. Ano yung take-away mo sa buong event na to?
Mahalin nyo ang open source. Yan ang sabi ko sa inyo. The best thing in life is free. And when we say free, hindi siya libre, no?
Oo.
Gaya ng sinabi sa atin ni Ben-Hur, ano? Hindi siya hindi siya libre in the sense na hindi ka nagbabayad ng software, pero ang higit sa lahat doon ay free, as in malaya. Freedom. Diba?
Kasi freedom is di ba? Is ano 'yun? Relative.
Yes.
Diba? Okay, anyway, pinakita na namin yung code 2 and 3, no? Sabihin lang namin ulit kung paano yung mechanics. Halos giveaway na, ayan. So, ayan, napanood yun yung buong live stream, done na yung 0. So, open na yung form. So, paano siya ma-access? Visit nyo yung app.pwapilipinas.org or i-download nyo yung PWA Pilipinas app sa Play Store o kaya sa Microsoft Store pag naka-Windows kayo. Tapos gawa kayo account, click nyo Events tab, tapos fill upan nyo yung, open yung Events tab, tapos hanapin yung event na to. Kasi maraming events pa tayong nakalinya eh. So, i-select nyo muna yung Hacktoberfest celebration na entry. Tapos, click nyo yung register, fill upan nyo yung form kasama yung code na binigay namin, yung 3. Tapos, click nyo yung register, submit nyo yung form. Tapos, magra-raffle tayo sa October 17. Ayan. October 17, anytime from there, no? Tapos, at least 2. O yan, 2. O, pwede na yung 2. Lagyan nyo yung 2 yun. Di ba? Giveaway na yan. O, di ba? Dapat ba in order? O, in order daw. O, hindi, ilagay nyo 2 and 3. Di ba?
Tama. Yun yun, 2 and 3. O, 1 or 2, di ba? O, 1 and 3.
Ilalagay yung nauna sa 1. Kasi, disqualified. Dapat tama yung Kung nakuha nyo yung 2 and 3, di yung 3. Kung nakuha mo yung 1 and 3, idilagay mo sa 1 and 3. Ganun.
Baga in order yun. Hindi pwedeng 3 and 1.
Bawal.
Bawal yun. Ano lang yun, pag uminom ka na ng kape. Pwede yun.
Mag-fill up kayo, sayang to 7,000 yung ticket.
Yan na.
Andrea. Oo.
Andrea, consecutive codes tayo.
Tingnan nga natin sino yung speakers kasi hindi napakita kanina yung share ko lang para makita natin. Yan. Nag-crash yung browser. Saan na ba yan? Ayan. Loading siya. Ayan Softcon. Tapos white page lang. Ayan. 530 speakers. Kaya yung speakers nila. Ay, mali. Speakers. Wow. May taga Netflix, may taga Monster Lab. Si Monster Lab. Facebook, Oracle, Stratpoint to. Globe. DXC, naming brands. Accenture. Friend natin Accenture. Converge. Si Arvin Lat. Newerx yan.
Natin si Arvin Lat.
Point West.
IBM. Point West. Globe.
Oh, IBM, di ba? Ito si Seiji, oh. Ayan, no.
Si Seiji, oh, nakita mo si Seiji. Diba, parang excited.
Oh, ito si Zio, sa Stratpol. Taga Flutter Philippines. Tapos si Stephen Vinuya. Ayan, nandyan din sila. Oo. O, di ba ang daming speakers? Mag-fill up lang kayo ng forms, may raffle lang, at maka. Diba? Kung sino matuto pa. Yan. Sana may nag-fill up na. Fill up niyo yan, kasi kung hindi kami yung a-attend dyan, bahala kayo.
Kasi Titus Manuel, idol natin yan sa data privacy and protection. Si Ria Trobo, yung teacher ko.
Saan?
Ma'am sa IBM. Sa baba.
IBM.
Shout out sa aking mahal na teacher.
Sa Lasal?
Sa Lasal.
See? Ayan, no? Kaya fill upan nyo na yung form, tapos binigyan namin yung code kanina, hindi namin papakita. Para may konting challenge. Dapat nga papa-essay ako kaya lang sabi ko, ano pa ba ibang announcement natin? Nasira na yung slides ko. Mga events namin po, may mga events pa kami. May web talks tayo ng Tuesday, so inaayos na natin yung speaker for that. Tapos, Code with PWA, Foundational Web Coding for Beginners. Yan, ano siya? Nandito yata siya eh. Wala ba? Free siya na web development bootcamp in partnership natin. PWA Pilipinas in partnership with Suite. Hanapin nga natin yung... Hanapin ko lang yung form para kung gusto nyo, sumali. Ayan. Or search nyo lang sa Facebook page namin. Share na lang namin ulit mamaya. Yan. Free siya na bootcamp. Matututo kayo. 2 days. May magtuturo sa inyo ng web development. Tapos, October 21, intro to PWA, Stack League naman yun, and PWA Pilipinas. Kung gusto nyo matuto ng PWA, or di ba, after nyo mag-bootcamp, ayan. October 21. Tapos, October 23, celebration of open source. Ayan. So, isa sa speaker natin, si Bash Yumol. Ayun. Matututo ulit tayo ng open source. Ayan. Okay. Mukhang okay na, no? Sana na make sure na i-fill up nyo yan kasi ko-close namin yung form ng 12 midnight. Happy Hacktoberfest, Michael.
Hoy, happy Hacktoberfest sa iyo, Andre, at saka sa inyong lahat, no? The best way to celebrate Hacktoberfest is to contribute sa open source. Alam kong marami kayong contribute dyan. No? Marami kayong matutulungan. And I believe that, as more software getting open na, alam kong more and more people will collaborate to make every life better.
Wow. Sige, okay na. Baka inaantok na sila nung mag-close na tayo ng program. Ulit, no? Magpo-post kami ng update sa Facebook para sa winners nung raffle. Yan, kinokollect pa namin yung inyong mga responses. Sagutan nyo ng mataim team.
Okay. Sige. Maraming salamat guys sa pagtutok sa PWA Pilipinas. I-like nyo lang ang aming Facebook, PWA Pilipinas, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, at iba pang mga social media chat, YouTube, tsaka iba pang mga social media channels. So, once again, my name is Michael Lance.
Wow. And I'm Andesito de Guzman.
And we are PWA
Pilipinas.
Goodbye. Yeah, goodbye guys.
Fill up nyo
Okay, fill up kayo guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye guys. Bye.
What I love about open source software is that it allows more people to shape the software that's shaping our world.
We really wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have community if it wasn't for our open source.
If you look around the industry, you'll see so much of what we do is powered by open source software, even if you don't know it.
Open source is at the heart of pretty much most technologies that people are using today.
It's so important because it's also a way to share ideas.
So if you want software that really serves a lot of different types of needs, that serves different types of communities, you need more people building that software, and open source allows for that.